The first rule about being a grognard is there is no school like old school, and it doesn't get any more old school in Mystara than Module B1 in Search of the Unknown. This was obviously the very first module in the setting that would become Mystara, and it's one of the most memorable modules because it is completely fill in the blank. So I'm Mr. Welch, and this is Welcome to Mystara. This is going to be a short one, the shortest one I've done. Once you actually get into it, you'll realize why. First, the fact that this is a basic level module is a bit of a misnomer. Outside the Wandering Monster charts, the entire module is left open for the DM to stock with both monsters and treasures. Depending on entirely what you put in the module, if you want to fight kobolds over a potion of healings or vampires over a Holy Avenger, that's entirely up to you. You can make this as much as a Monty Hall or a Hackfest if you'd like. It's entirely up to the DM what this module is actually about. If you stick with the framework of what's presented or just throw it all out and put in your own cast, that's exactly what this module's for. Bit of history, the module dates back to 1981. It was written by Mike Carr. There are several versions. The first one was set firmly in Greyhawk with various mentions to nations from that setting. Those mentions were dropped in later printings, and the module stayed very generic for the rest of its run. The most famous version was part of the 10th anniversary edition that was restricted to just 1,000 copies, and you had to mail order them at Gen Con. You aren't going to find a copy of that for under $1,000 if you can find a copy at all. The module is designed from the ground up to help a dungeon master with their first adventure. In a 32-page module, a full 10 pages are devoted to help the DM with the background, with encounter advice, monsters, treasures, NPCs, as well as useful tips for running the adventure. Some of the advice might seem self-evident, but remember this was a module written when the game was still very new and experienced players were extremely rare. So when you get to the part explaining how to divide up the treasure, that might seem obvious, but this module is literally starting from the ground up. The basic plot of the module is the legendary adventurers Rogaine and Zelagar. Rogaine, his name was Rogaine, have turned up missing, so they must be dead. Now it's a race to loot the lair that they set up and see what hidden treasures they've stashed away. Of course you can change that to whatever you'd like, but all the rumor charts reflect the hidden dungeon you're about to loot. Well, of course you change all the rumors to fit your version of the story, and that's fine too. The dungeon location is deliberately left generic, and you can place it anywhere in the middle of a desert, a lost island, under an abandoned building in the middle of the capital city. Literally you can drop this dungeon into any setting. It's meant to be non-specific to give the dungeon master as much freedom as possible. One of the hardest things for a DM to do when getting started is creating a dungeon, not just picking the monsters, treasures, and traps, but actually designing the building. In Search of the Unknown provides a fully built dungeon as an example to inspire future DMs. It's a standard basic series 2-level dungeon, with the upper level being a complete man-made complex. The second level is a cavern system, giving you 2 radically different styles of dungeons to explore through. The module has some of the best replay values of any of the classic modules, if not the most, because all you need is an eraser and some new monsters to have an entirely different experience every time you play through. The one thing the module is very well known for is just how much detail is put into each dungeon room. Almost every room has paragraphs of descriptive text. It might only be a 2-level dungeon, but it's an extremely well-described 2-level dungeon. The description does peter out in the caverns mostly, but even then there are a few rooms that have built-in mechanics like the cavern with the stones or the bat cave, and traps are already built into the dungeon, so you don't have to worry about that. Of course, you can always add more if you'd like. It's fairly obvious the module is an introductory module, as the players frequently run across needed supplies and equipment. One of the temptations of the modules is for the players to try and drag the vast amount of supplies and dry goods back to the cell at the town and try to make some extra money. There's quite a few rooms loaded with food stocks, general supplies, and, well, players being players, they're going to look at this as treasure to be sold off. Don't let them derail the adventure by trying to open up a dry goods store after the fact. The module has a lot of rooms that have been remembered through the years because of how well they were designed. Even if they don't put a monster or any treasure in the room, people will spend quite a bit of time trying to figure out everything in the area because of how unusual it is. The most famous room of pools has stumped people over how to get that one key and trying to figure out what the key unlocks. Don't leave your players wondering for years and just have the key fit something. Other rooms have long perplexed players, including the storeroom with the food stocks, because somebody is going to try to drink the barrel of ale. Even if you point out that the barrel contains 30 pounds of ale and asks the fighter again if he wants to consume almost 10% of his body weight in alcohol, he's still going to try to do it. Of course, you could be like my party and spend the rest of the campaign eating the hard candy that you find in the barrel 30 levels later, and we still hadn't eaten all them peppermints. Players have never played a single game before in their life. You can skip character generation with pages of pre-generated characters in the back of the book. 48 characters in the back waiting to be played or you can hire them out as NPCs if you want. If you ever wanted to play Harg of the City of Afar, he's a thief on page 30. Show Rimbo the Halfling and Ego of the Holy Brotherhood await a player to make them their own character. There's actually a vestigial reference to the Greyhawk with the cleric Tacit, who's a servant of St. Cuthbert among the NPCs for those Greyhawk fans. You roll on a chart to determine what spell you have, as you're all just pretty much first level, and again you roll again for equipment, and that's it. You're ready to play. Get killed, go back to the book, get a new character, then you make a few rolls, and you're good to go back immediately. There's not much to convert to 5th edition because it is all fill in the blank. The only thing you have to change is the trap difficulty checks and any skill checks you might want to add, and the rest is up to you grabbing various monsters and the treasure straight from the monster manual, and then you are good to play. Of course, 5th edition monsters have a ton more hit points than the original basic monsters, so instead of facing a dozen orcs, you're going to need to cut the number of monsters to about a fourth to balance that encounter. 5th edition just doesn't do the swarm tactics that the basic set monsters like. Other things you need to consider is this module is recommended for 5 to 8 players from the basic set, and you usually only need about half that in player characters in 5th edition. If you have to have more players, just add more monsters. Okay, so finding the module is extremely easy. It's one of the most published modules TSR ever made, and it was included in numerous sets as your sample dungeon until they finally replaced it with Keep on the Borderlands. You can find used copies with the cardboard cover with the map starting right around about a sawbuck over on eBay. If you want a new reprint, it's $8 on Drive-Thru RPG. That's for a hard copy, and it's about half that for the PDF. If you have to get a copy, spend just a few extra dollars and get the physical copy. You get the one with the cardboard cover that separates, and you've got the map as a DM screen built in. And that was one of the best things about the old school modules that I really miss. So that's going to wrap up In Search of the Unknown. You knew this was going to be a short review, as there's not much to review. The plot is what you make it. It's a fill-in-the-blank module. It's Mad Lib's version of Dungeons & Dragons. If you want a necromancer guarded by a horde of zombies, you got it. Orc Warboss and his tribe have taken up residence. Just fill in the blanks. You can put in as many or as few monsters as you want for fun. After you take out the original Goblin Menace, you put in many years ago, and then a few years and levels later, have them come back and have the dungeon filled with, say, a large amount of Hive Brood or Yuan-Ti or something nasty. Your players can run through the same dungeon, only this time much harder. The module gives you one of the best written dungeons out there. It's up to you to make the encounters interesting. So now it's come to this, reviewing the last 4 basic modules, and the first one left in the queue is one of the most iconic Dungeons & Dragons modules of all time. It's Keep on the Borderlands, the one that was sold with the basic set, replacing In Search of the Unknown. This module has probably killed more players than any other adventure in D&D, not because of the evil intelligence of the villain like in Ravenloft, and it's not because it's a sadistic meat grinder like Tomb of Horrors. No, most people died in the Keep because they were first level characters charging into hordes of bad guys with no clue what to do. You had to learn tactics to play Keep on the Borderlands. It was unforgiving, it was merciless. You had to learn from your mistakes to adapt to your surrounding. Keep slaughtered our characters to teach us a lesson. It hardened us. It made us hate. We beat the adventure because we outlasted it. We hacked down the orcs, the gnolls, goblins, bugbears, kobolds, hobgoblins, the undead, the evil cultists, the minotaur, and the ogre, because it was us or them. It made us what we are. We walked out of those caves covered in blood and several layers higher because that's what the module required of us, and now we thank the module for that, making us battle-scarred veterans out of optimistic farm boys and wizard apprentices. I'm Mr. Welch. Welcome to Mystara. Welcome to the Caves of Chaos. Welcome to Hell. Keep on the Borderland, or B2, was written by Gary Gygax back in '79. It was his only contribution to BECMI as far as the modules go. It was included in the basic box set until 1982, specifically designed to teach new players how to immerse themselves in the game. It gives you a glossary of dungeon terms, because a lot of the terms dealing with medieval castle design wasn't commonly known knowledge back in the era of disco. If you need to know what a ton of wine is, it's 252 gallons, not 2,000 pounds. This glossary has your back. This also includes some graph paper so you can map everything yourself, which sadly became a lost art in roleplay. The module has been reprinted numerous times, as well as one of the modules given a sequel in '89 and included in the compilation module In Search of Adventure. Recently, Goodman Games updated it along with Search of the Unknown to 5th edition in their release into the Borderlands. It's easily one of the easiest modules to find in print. So the module opens up as you ride up to the Nameless Keep. The fort's actually extremely generic with no names given for anyone at all. This is intentional. If you want to put the keep in your world, you can name anyone you want. You don't have to keep calling them bailiff or merchant. The keep is there for two parts. One, the DM is going to try to teach you how to roleplay by interacting with all these NPCs. There's quite a few of them, from hirelings to outfitters. You're going to need to save some money for those hirelings, because if you don't, you're going to find out soon enough that your little party is nowhere near ready for the horrors they're going to encounter. Second, the keep has way more information than the party needs. There is so much temptation for any thieves in the party. You're going to have to keep them in check if you play with the same parties I played with. You walk by the Lone Bank window and you see that jeweled scabbard in it, like among other items. It's like showing a dog a steak. Players, keep a tight leash on your larcenous types while visiting the keep. There's a reason why the building is in crossbow range of the guards on the wall. You're going to spend a good chunk of your time shopping or at the tavern. Coincidentally, you're going to find there's a lot of mercenaries at the tavern willing to help you out for a large share of the treasure. Don't skimp. That third level dwarf is going to block a lot more arrows than your first level cleric. The actual location of the keep is left up to the DM. In official settings, it's actually found in 3 of them. In Mystara, it's Castellan Keep in the northeast of Karamikos. Greyhawk calls it Kendall Keep in the Yeomanry. 4th edition kicked it over to Nintir Vale near the Chaos Scar. 5th edition, no doubt, is going to take it and put it somewhere in the Forgotten Realms, probably near Cormyr, because all the cool modules need to be set in the Forgotten Realms, stripped of their originality and shoehorned into the most generic fantasy setting. Wizards has managed to bleach out all that made the realms memorable in favor of celebrity cameos and rehashed plots, but I'm not bitter. So now you've got your gear, you hired a small army, and you're ready to conquer the world. But first, side quests. That's right, the area between the keep and the cave is sporadically littered with various minor encounters to teach the players the ins and outs of combat. If the DM needs to teach a lesson, just how lethal this module is going to be. For your first extremely difficult battle, throw the Raiders at them. That's 10 bandits that can solo a party on its own, assuming the wizard just doesn't cast Sleep, of course. Sleep is your friend. It's your get-out-of-death-free card in this module because a large number of baddies tend to clump together. Don't waste it. If the players don't hire mercs and decide to go off on their own, let them see the Raiders from a distance so they can realize they aren't ready to handle this adventure without help. If you want to show how deadly the combat can be, let the Mad Hermit, his pet mountain lion, surprise the party and eat one of their mercs. You don't have to hold their hand throughout the entire adventure, but you can sure bring it to their attention when the module is lethal enough. So wear your big boy pants. Bear in mind, when this module was written, D&D was still extremely new. The modules were much more lethal. The module recommends 6 to 9 players with mercenaries and NPCs to bring the number closer to 15. That's triple what a party today consists of, though 5th edition is very death adverse, so that does temper things. Once you've encountered all the wilderness events, you finally get to the caves. This is where it gets extremely dangerous. Not just actually fighting the monsters in the cave. There's 11 caves presented to you. Some of them are hidden, but if you look, you'll find them. If you go through the Goblin or the Kobold cave first, you've got a chance. If you head straight for the Ogre, Minotaur, or Ooze cave, there's a good chance this is going to be an extremely short adventure. You have got to double and triple check for the clues to what's inside. I can't stress that enough. This is a fantasy version of Let's Make a Deal, only door number 3 leads to a big bad that can one-shot player characters and can do it twice a turn. If you're the DM, you need to kick them in the right direction if they try to make a beeline for the evil cult cave, because that will be the shortest campaign you've ever played. The module throws just about every humanoid from the basic handbook at you in waves, each one home to a different cave, with the orcs getting 2 caves. Ideally, you want to face the kobolds and the goblins first. Fortunately, these are 2 of the closer caves to the entrance. That is a theme. The easier caves are closer to encourage the party to play them in order. Combats are much faster. Unlike 5th edition, most humanoids in basic are designed to be one-shot. It's extremely rare to have a grunt with more than 5 hit points, and it's almost unheard of them to have more than 10. Unfortunately, the gate goes both ways. Player characters are in single digits for hit points for quite a while. While it was over 1,000 XP to get to 2nd level for the fastest level classes, like the halflings, the thieves, and the clerics, it's twice that for the rest. That's assuming you're playing with the basic races. If you decide to go off the menu and grab the Creature Crucible races, there's going to be a good chance you're tens of thousands XP until you get more hit points for your Sphinx and your Werebear. Once you're in the cave, it's a simple matter of going room by room and killing the bad guys. Some of them are quite clever and use choke points and ambushes to attack the party, others just bum rush you. For the most part, you'll run across the bad guys in groups of maybe half a dozen unless you alert the whole cave early. There's a few places where you're going to come across numbers of monsters in large quantity, and that turns into a total brawl with a serious risk of death to party members. The caves were not meant to be defeated in a single visit. By the end of the module, you're going to have a bulk discount back up at the Keep's healer, and it's very likely there are going to be quite a few replacement characters rolled up along the way. This is an introductory module in the same way your father taught you how to swim, by getting it thrown into the deep end. The module is the crawliest of dungeon crawls. You carve up the kobolds, then you walk over to the orc cave, and you kill all of them. There's another orc lair, and so on until you get to the last cave, and then the adventure is finally over. There's no overarching plot. They are so bad, so you just have to stab them. It's literally wash, rinse, and repeat until you finally put down the final bad guy. What it's lacking in plot more than makes up for in action. You're not going to have to go more than 3 rooms before the next combat. By the time you are done with this module, you would have killed hundreds of humanoids and other monsters, freed numerous prisoners, and still have only made it to maybe 4th level. But you will be well versed in combat, and it will be second nature to you. You will have learned the value of area of effect weapons and spells, the importance of fighting in bottlenecks against superior numbers, and why slings are some of the best weapons in the game because they never actually run out of ammunition. Sure, your idealistic cleric might come out with a 1,000-yard stare covered head to toe in orc blood, but you knew the risks when you signed up. Most of the caves are almost carbon copies of each other. Some have more traps and hold more prisoners, but you will quickly notice all of them have a common room and a chief's room with a guard room out front. Few of the caves do stand out as unique. The Hobgoblin Lair is rather famous for its armory, where the party's fighters go from slobs that can barely afford chainmail to decked out in some of the best armors and weapons a first-level character can only dream of. The Minotaur Cave lives up to its expectations, being a magical labyrinth that ends with you facing one of the toughest monsters in the game, or at least the module. There's a reason why you don't want to skip caves, as this one is one of the furthest back in the canyon. And then there's the evil cult base, which has long been held up as an example of why Gary Gygax actually hates players. The Shrine of Evil Chaos is one of the last caves you will encounter. Lots of undead, but nothing too powerful. What the problem is regarding the shrine, is there's a lot of saving throws required to avoid some really nasty effects. There's one curse that requires a save against magic at -2 or turn evil, and your saving throws against magic at this point are almost pathetic. With the best saving throw in the party against magic belonging to a dwarf or a halfling, and even with that penalty, you still got a 75% chance of failure. Another room requires a saving throw if you look up at a pattern on the wall, or you're going to get hypnotized until the bad guys attack you. Again, the odds of passing the saving throw aren't good, and there's not much in the way of because the trap is set off if you look around. If you're the DM, you're going to need to provide some sort of warning to the party regarding these, because Gary had a bad habit of putting traps in without much chance of avoiding them. One aspect of the module that is still controversial today is the kids. There's a lot of humanoid kids that you're going to find as you slaughter their parents. This was a big deal back in the 1980s, and the discussion hasn't moved much, except now it's used by people who hate fun and want to rob us of the alignment system. So what do you do with the kids? The keep doesn't want them. You can't let them go off on their own. They are going to grow up hating you, but they're still kids. DMs have tortured their players with this ethical dilemma for decades now, and it's never a right answer. Except letting that one player use the kids for pike practice. That wasn't cool in 1984, Jason. It's not cool now. Keep on the Borderlands is very much an introductory module. It's not a player-friendly one. You are under constant attack back when healing just wasn't a thing you could do at will, and spells were pretty rare. The book recommends every party member start with a healing potion because of the large number of battles you are going to take part in. There's a lot of recommendations that the module throws out early that a lot of people tend to forget, like hiring mercenaries or the fact that many of the humanoids will take prisoners and will sell party members back for gold ransom. The adventure is meant to take place over several weeks, if not months, as you venture into the cave and clean out one group of baddies, then retreat back to heal, restock, and recruit more mercs. People remember the combat, but they forget how much combat there was. If you want to get this module, it's one of the easiest ones to find, if not the easiest. Original copies go for about $10-20 on eBay. It was one of the most numerous modules ever printed. It's been turned into sequels and converted into every setting. If you want a PDF, it's $5. As always, I recommend getting the hard copy when you can. Quality can vary because of the age of the module, but the $20 modules tend to be better quality unless you want to go for mint condition. Then you're going to look at a lot more money, obviously. And that's it for Keep on the Borderlands. It's a classic for a reason. For the people that love combat, it gives you everything you could possibly want and more. It's lethal, it's unforgiving. This is like learning how to play Doom by cranking up the difficulty to Nightmare right out of the box. It's very much a child of D&D's wargame roots. You're not going to get attached to characters until they get a level under you. People forget to follow the module's advice, especially since hirelings have largely become a part of D&D left in the past. If you follow the module's advice, it's a great module. If you don't, it's a meat grinder filled with the corpses of 1,000 adventurers. If there is any D&D adventure with a more convoluted past, it is undoubtedly the topic of today's remaster, Palace of the Silver Princess. This is the module where the original version sold last year for $10,000. The orange cover is the stuff of legend, and the green cover was the starter dungeon for many a player. The story behind this adventure has become the stuff of legend, with questions on why the modules were recalled, why it was rewritten, and who was responsible for that, and so much that the actual adventure has been sidelined by its legacy. It's time to look at this adventure and delve into the history of its more famous version. Welcome to Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we are choosing our own adventure. Palace of the Silver Princess, Module B3, was released in 1981 and was written by Gene Wells, the first TSR product ever written by a woman. Errol Otis provided the art, which plays a huge factor in the upcoming controversy. It was 32 pages long and was another attempt at an introductory module, being the third of 4 in a row before TSR gave up on making basic modules for new players until King's Festival, many years later. The module hit the shelves and was immediately recalled for numerous reasons that have been muddled, confused, and falsely attributed to other factors. Fortunately, through the power of friendship, I was able to track down the people who were there and pick their brains. The Silver Princess Orange cover mess resulted from multiple problems, and the rumors why it was recalled have spread throughout the decades. And when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. The original Silver Princess was a rushed mess. TSR was on a tight deadline and needed the book out ASAP. So Wells was given her first assignment, but editing was at best cursory. That was part 1 of the story. A new writer putting out her first book without editing is a recipe for disaster. Part 2 was the art, with Errol Otis deciding to model the Ubus, a group of 3-headed hermaphrodites, after various TSR employees who were not happy with their depiction. Couple this with the illusion of the Decapus, with a woman tied up by her hair and surrounded by a group of ugly men bent on torturing her. That was a little too S&M for TSR, especially since certain types sought an excuse to attack them publicly. The third nail in Silver Princess's coffin was that the original module was fill-in-the-blank for a good chunk of it, similar to In Search of the Unknown. Various heads of D&D wanted the modules recalled, either because of the art, the poor editing, or the design choices, so it was yanked off the shelf and buried in a landfill. Well, not all of them. Many TSR employees escaped with their own personal copies, and not all the copies sent out were returned. A few were purchased as soon as they hit the shelves. There weren't many, and the owners held on to them like they were lost relics, which in this case, they were. The book was turned over to Tom Moldvay to fix the adventure, and new artists were brought in to complete the module in an entirely different style at great expense and at the last minute. Only the premise of the module was kept. The fill-in-the-blank approach, along with several monsters and encounters, were scrapped entirely. Wells left the company, though not because she was disgusted with the whole affair. She just found another job. Sadly, all this information was acquired secondhand from former TSR Old Guard and the people that came after them. Gene Wells passed over a decade ago. Despite its almost mythic status, the module wasn't very good. It felt incomplete, and TSR wanted fully fleshed out adventures compared to the fill-in-the-blank versions. Some encounters were deadly for starting characters, and the plot was left to the DM to fill in. It did give you a map of the region northwest of Glantry, which has been a bane for cartographers trying to make it fit into later ones. There is a distinct lack of a never-ending mountain range in the module, which doesn't fit well into later maps. The orange copy of the Silver Princess was released by Wizards free as a PDF, and you can get a copy on the vault. I'll link it in the description. If you want a physical copy, they go for between $800 and $10,000. I'm not making that up. That is literally what people are paying for this thing. Skip forward a few years to 1981. Then we get the Green Palace of the Silver Princess, rewritten by Tom Moldvay with additional art by Jim Holloway, among others. Gene Wells is also credited with this, but from my understanding, she played no part in the rewrite. And of course, there are no art credits because they know how much I hate that. They were just all sitting around a table at Lake Geneva and decided to make some random 9-year-old's life miserable 4 decades later by not providing proper art credits. The most significant change you will notice on the back cover is that Princess Argenta meets a knight riding a white dragon compared to a red dragon in the original. And despite the module's name, Princess Argenta is not made out of silver. So stop asking me how much she weighs and the price of a pound of silver. Palace of the Silver Princess is where we first meet the immortal Eric, that's Eric with an A, who was mentioned to be a god in the module because the I in BECMI was still years away. He would later become the boogeyman of the entropic immortals, constantly trying to bring his eldritch friend into Mystara and corner the market in non-Euclidean geometry. The plot starts when the other immortals get tired of his crap and stuff him into an extraplanar locker in the form of a giant ruby. The ruby somehow makes its way to the land of Haven, where a race of Fae contain the evil, called the Protectors, though unlike the orange cover, they aren't statted out. For those curious, they appear as tall, lucent humanoid figures that float above the ground by several inches. The males are bald, and the females have long flowing hair, and they are both translucent green. Their clothes appear to flutter in a breeze no matter where they are. They also have 7 hit dice and will attack anyone not of lawful alignment. Apologies in advance if you decided to be neutral in a module for levels 1 to 3. They only appear in the background text of the green module, though they do appear on the back cover art. The reason for the party's involvement in this module is a classic, the Killer Mist. They arrive at the half-destroyed castle that can be anywhere you want it to be. It's surrounded by a red haze that kills people that walk out into it, just like in Ravenloft or Castle Amber. Congratulations, you've been railroaded. Then you get to participate in attempt number 3 in how to make an introductory module. Attempt number 1 was entirely fill in the blank. Attempt number 2 was throw every monster possible at the party and hope they learn tactics quickly. Attempt number 4 involves a module that gradually removes details from the encounters, as it expects the Dungeon Master to fill in the missing sections. Attempt number 3 turns the adventure into a choose-your-own-adventure story, at least for the first few sections. The initial 5 pages are in the form of, here's the situation, if you want to do this, go to paragraph X or paragraph Y. It's written in the second person, so it's for the players to read and decide. This type of module design for D&D has never been used again in any other adventure that I know of, certainly not in BECMI, with the exception of solo modules, which makes sense. It stands out as a very curious design and could have been the result of trying to fix this module very quickly. The intro section teaches players all about combat, turning undead, and instills a fear of traps that goes beyond what is typically expected. It can be dangerous because there's a lot of d6 damage if they choose poorly, meaning everybody but fighting types are in danger of biting it before they even get out of the introduction. If they decide to go into the red glow, it's 1d6 damage around, which means your brand new first level character is not long for this world. Most of the combat is against giant rat, so the kid gloves are on, but you have several fights in this section. This is the most glaring and out of place part of any module I've ever seen. Even the later modules that obsess over the characters playing ancient board games like Nine Men's Morris and Talons of Night. It's meant for the players, whereas the rest of the module is designed normally. It's rather combat heavy for such a short section. Nobody I asked remembered the reason for this unique design shift. Still, a few speculated that it was trying to capitalize on the growing popularity of choose-your-own-adventure books at the time. Considering the D&D versions of those books coming down the pipe, I can't say I blame them. Still, it's jarring when you're used to running standard versions of modules. But at least it wasn't fill in the blank. Now comes the fun part, figuring out what's happening. A large chunk of block text is meant to be read to the players explaining the mission, and it's as vague as possible. It gives the legend behind Haven, telling you about the princess, and the mysterious knight that arrives mysteriously, and then something happens in a great mystery, and then the mists come. Finally, the last paragraph tells you that all of this information is being given to you by a protector through a dream. The same protectors that have been largely pulled out of the version of the module and not really explained. So you get a dream from this guy with no lead-up, who gives you a quest to find a lost princess, that you're supposed to trust this guy. He doesn't show ID, doesn't let you run a background check, doesn't give you his references, nothing. Then as soon as you arrive, you're locked into the castle due to a poisonous aura that will kill you if you try to leave. Nothing suspicious about this at all. Having taken the nostalgia goggles completely off, this module did not age well. Now your party has a cursory idea of the plot. It has managed to survive the choose-your-own-adventure part of the book that was apparently written for one player but then turns into a multiplayer module as soon as they get to paragraph 37 on page 10. So what's there to do? Well, it's a stock dungeon crawl. There are quite a few new monsters, though nowhere near as many as the original. By a few, I mean 3, all beloved Mystara critters. By beloved, I mean ambush predators that will cause trust issues in new players for years to come, in the form of archer bushes, vampire roses, decapi, and Travis. This might be a beginner module, but nowhere in there is this a easy module. For new DMs, read this thing cover to cover before you even start. It's quirky and like nothing else you've seen regarding design. There is a ton of backstory in Silver Princess, far more than the previous basic modules, and that story is vital to solving the riddle of defeating Eric. About 24 NPCs factor into the adventure, and understanding their roles and how they play into solving the mystery. Some of the NPCs are there to serve as role-playing elements, like Duchess and Candela, 2 classic Mystara characters from the very beginning. These were Jean's favorite characters and were there to serve as tools for the DM. They were thieves that could serve as foils for the party, rivals trying to rob them blind, romance options if you were brave enough, or replacement party members for groups that decided that thieves were lame and they didn't need to search for traps. This pair is probably the one thing that has survived in the player's memories more than anything else. Certainly not the adventure. There are a couple of NPCs that the parties walk in on doing rival adventuring stuff, like Morgan Ironwolf or Bargle. Candela and Duchess have been reused multiple times, with their art being updated and their adventures being expanded upon. For a lot of players, these ladies were their first rivals. Their characters want to loot this castle, and so do these thieves. They aren't a threat to the party, they're thieves, not fighters. They would certainly be no match for 6 adventurers, but they have a set of unique skills that could prove helpful, especially in a trap-happy death dungeon like Silver Princess. I've reused them for my Mystara books. A few years ago, my friend Domenico Nazzetti created several art pieces using them for art of the genre. You can find them in their Folio magazine. And then somebody sent me this piece from the upcoming WotC book, suggesting that this is Duchess and Candela for 5th edition. Though Silver Princess isn't being reprinted, and they've never appeared in any other module that I know of. WotC's art director and I will have to agree to disagree on design choices. I want action and adventure in my imagery, not spa day. Before returning to the adventure, let me warn you about trying to get them drunk. Duchess rocks an 18 constitution, Candela isn't far behind with a 15. I don't know why that's always struck me as odd, but they have some monster stats for being thieves. Thinking back, I will admit I lied about them being this module's only memorable part. Then there's the garden. Oh my god, the garden. This is one of the main reasons why old school gamers hate plants. You know the meme where everything is fine until the jungle starts speaking Vietnamese? Imagine if the jungle doesn't even bother talking to you before trying to kill you. The garden here is comprised of primarily dead and dried up plants, and only over a dozen of them are murderous. This can TPK a party quickly if the dice come up right. Remember, characters have no more than 20 hit points for this module, probably even less than that for anyone not playing a dwarf or a fighter. They are now looking at 12 attacks in the first turn from all the monsters, probably attacking from surprise as well. I hope you didn't piss off Duchess and Candela because you're probably going to need replacement characters. And if you book it into the next room, first you missed a major MacGuffin in the garden, and second you run into the cover monster, the Decapus. This ambush predator has 9 attacks, each one doing 1d6 damage. These back-to-back rooms can wipe a party on average rolls from just the sheer number of attacks. If you want to keep the new players that you're introducing to D&D, be very careful about these 2 areas. And if you're curious, the original versions put these encounters apart from each other, though the Decapus was an entirely different creature then. Just a warning for DMs. These are encounters that will make players swear off druids. Dungeon Masters, you must level up the party for a good chunk of this adventure. It says it's for levels 1 to 3, and it's an introduction for new players. It lies. The combat encounters in this game will wipe a beginning party without mercy several times over. The party has to fight a werewolf leading a group of orcs while they try to stop the big bad. There is a level-draining undead in this adventure, and in BECMI, level drainers kill first-level characters in a single hit. There are saber die traps and monsters. There's a random encounter with a Medusa. There's an insane guard named Travis who will betray the party if they give him half a chance. Okay, he's not that threatening, but when we ran this adventure for the first time, a guy named Travis played the cleric, and we might have teased him mercilessly all those decades ago. I should probably apologize, but he did get the Mace +2 when the adventure was done, so I don't want to hear about it. And there is some seriously good loot to be had here. Far more than most basic modules. There is some seriously good loot to be had here. Far more than most basic modules. Moldvase sprinkled several powerful magic items around the dungeon, which were pretty hefty for a basic module. A +2 throwing knife might not sound that great, but if it's your first magic item that you ever find, you will treasure it. Characters will find thousands of gold pieces scattered around the dungeon. Many magical items or components like Wolfsbane or the magic scrolls make the boss fight that much easier. That is one of the charms of the module. It is very high risk, high reward. Yeah, there's an excellent chance nobody walking into this dungeon is coming out alive, but the survivors are ready for second level. Tom Moldvay may have been trying to kill you in every other room, but at least he paid well. The Palace of the Silver Princess is a time capsule module. TSR wanted to try something new, but didn't know what they were looking for. The first module was flawed, leading to the recall. Despite claims by various people, there wasn't a single reason for the module being pulled. Gary didn't make the decision. Bloom did. Gary loved the art. He hated the fill-in-the-blank approach. The book was poorly edited. The adventure was barely functional. The art was classic Errol Otis with several inside jokes about TSR staff. And the one racy image was going to raise the hackles of the puritanical harpies that comprised the Satanic Panic. This module was doomed from the start. The green cover can be found for about $50 secondhand. There's a POD and PDF available for the vaults for far less, but you don't get the pull-away cover. The green version is almost schizophrenic in design. It switches from the second-person choose-your-own-adventure to the typical module, and that's a bit jarring. Plus, there are elements of the original orange cover that are included that weren't fleshed out very well. For a basic module, it's a meat grinder with a lot of ambushes and monsters that even third-level characters shouldn't be encountering. Where Keep on the Borderlands relied on the quantity of its monsters to threaten the party, Silver Princess went with the quality. 41 down and 10 to go. Welcome to Mystara for another remaster, as I'm trying to knock these out after starting them 3 years ago. Next up is The Lost City, which is considered one of the greatest modules ever created, and ranked pretty high in the starter module category as well. It's got sand, almost 100 rooms, actually exactly 100 rooms, a lot of crazy people, a trapped elder horror, and it exemplifies how to turn a simple dungeon crawl into something far greater. And it showcases many of the failings of 5th edition when you look at the new version. I shouldn't be bitter, but this was the last 5e module I ran, and I still have some issues. But why is this adventure so good, and why is it so much better in BECMI? I'm Mr. Welch, and take me down to the very lost city where the people are nuts and Zargon shows no pity. Oh, won't you please take me home. Module B4, The Lost City, was written in 1982 by the late great Tom Moldvay, with legendary art done by the equally late and great Jim Holloway. It's only 28 pages, showcasing the top half of a buried ziggurat, but the entire pyramid is laid out and features a mind-blowing 100 rooms, as I mentioned. That number is on par with the Hickman's modules for content. But Lost City doesn't fill out the second half of the pyramid's rooms, leaving that to the DM. It still gives you the map, the monsters, and the treasure, but there's no boxed text or detailed descriptions. It's up to you to use your imagination. A few years back, Goodman Games was allowed to update the game to 5th edition with its original Adventures Reincarnated line, being the 4th book in that series, with new additional content. While a welcome return to Mystara, it also showcased quite a few problems updating older modules to the far more forgiving 5th edition. More on that later. Paizo revisited the module in Dragon 315, and before you go looking for that magazine, let me spoil it for you. It's a lazy cut and paste of the module's background, adding nothing new to the adventure. You can get an original module for about $20, unless you want the hole punch variant, which will cost you about double that. A PDF is the normal $5, and a print-on-demand version is about $12. The downside to the print-on-demand is you don't get the super useful pull-away screen, so spend the extra money and get the original. The Goodman Games Remasters is $50, doesn't have any pull-away maps, but it has the original module reprinted inside, and it's a huge honkin' hardback. You can find that one on store shelves at the better-stocked game stores. The premise of the module is simple. You get separated from your desert caravan because of a storm, and after days of wandering, you've lost your mounts, you're almost out of food, when you discover the top of the step pyramid and realize that's your only chance at survival. Unless, of course, you've got good berry, then you don't have to worry about survival, because you no longer need rations thanks to a first-level spell, which defeats the point of the impetus of finding shelter because you're out of supplies. This hammered home the complaint about 5th edition taking away large parts of DM fiat required for the adventure to happen. In the basic rules, you're walking into that first room with no water, you haven't eaten in days, and you look like extras from Dune, only without your reliable battle pug. In the 5th edition version, the players haven't even tapped into their food reserves, and thanks to a simple cantrip, they weren't even covered in sand. The city of Synodecia is located canonically in the deserts of Yalara, though nobody knows exactly where. Apparently they lost it somehow. It's ancient, dating back before the Thaiatian Empire was a thing, and though that causes a minor snarl with how long these people have been isolated. The Mystara fanbase speculates that this was once a colony of the Millennian Empire, namely because the last king was named Alexander. The Greek theme does make the most sense. The module is definitely set in Mystara, as the Helden freeholds are mentioned on page 18. That's not essential, unless you take my advice to make all the documents and all forms of communication utterly alien in this adventure. Which you should, as it highlights that these people have been by themselves for so long they've forgotten about the rest of the world. If you meet the first people of the city and they speak the same language, the immersion is spoiled. Then you have to burn spell slots to understand, rely on the thief's ability to read languages, or try to communicate with them through trial and error. Or if you're playing 5th edition, skip all that boring role-playing stuff and just spend a minute to cast comprehend languages without having to use up any of your resources. The Synodecians are the most memorable part of the adventure for most players. The citizens of this fair city, which is actually underground, and the pyramid, which is the upper part of it, haven't taken to isolation very well. Most of them have become cuckoo cloudlanders and will react to the party in almost chaotic behaviors. Okay, not almost, they will go absolutely nuts. They spend their time getting wasted on exotic wines and some seriously high-quality narcotics. This has left most of them trapped in a dreamlike fugue where they hallucinate they are someone or something else. They will dress the part, often appearing in animal costumes like bees, frogs, birds, or various monsters. They're not fooling anyone, they're costumes, not disguises. Still, the guy that thinks he's a werewolf will be a bit bitey. They wear masks to embrace their dream self almost without exception. Even the saner Synodecians won't be caught dead without their mask. Most of their fantasies are harmless. Others are pretty murderous. There's no warning if the masked nutter in front of you is going to turn hostile. It adds to the surreal element of the adventure. One minute the insane townspeople are buzzing you, pretending to be birds, and the next minute they're asking you if you would kindly impale yourself on this spear. Note I said most of them. A few have retained their sanity. The cult of Zargon are the big bads and are still rational. They're also homicidal psychotics, but at least they're rational homicidal psychotics. If they catch you, they will feed you to their self-appointed deity Zargon. More on that naughty boy later. For the good-ish guys, you've got the followers of the three immortals of Synodecia, Gorm, Mararua, and Usamagaras, or the patrons of dudes, chicks, and wizards. They will try to recruit the party, but with restrictions. Gorm only wants male fighters. Mararua wants female fighting types. And Usamagaras wants nerds. They will be friendly to outsiders who don't fit their stereotype, as long as you don't join one of their icky rivals. They will take various members of the party and adopt them into their cults, even giving non-preferred party members a lesser status if they want to join. But they can become hostile if you join one of the rival factions. You can avoid this if you're diplomatic enough, But remember that the Zargon members aren't recruiting. Getting the three factions to stop their bickering and work together is a significant theme of the adventure. Individually, they pale in comparison to the cult of Zargon. They don't have the numbers, the support, or the logistics to bring them down. Together, they have a chance to utilize the strength of each faction and compensate for their own shortcomings. It's up to the party to get them to realize this. The issue is they have centuries of distrust between each other. While they're not openly hostile, most discussions between them will quickly devolve into shouting matches. The player characters will have their work cut out for them if the Synodician factions are to be united against their common enemy, the Judeans People's Front, or Zargon, whichever is closest. The basic part of the adventure is just the first 5 levels of the pyramid, as you are trying to kill the High Priest of Zargon. This is helped along if a player is possessed by a ghost at some point, who has a serious hate hard-on for the guy who killed him years ago. If one of the players gets possessed by the ghost and plays along with it, there's some bonus XP, and the ghost knows the way to the big bad, so it's straight to the boss fight. It's an adventure for levels 1 to 3, and the rest of it is way beyond the scope of the basic rules. The 5e suggestions are all over the place because their additions make it rather difficult to balance the level of the party with the monsters they're encountering. 5th edition has a lot of encounters where the average monster's challenge rating is different from the encounters before or after it. So you might enter an area that's relatively easy after fighting through a challenging section. The DM must carefully balance the party's path without trying to railroad them. This is to prevent level 5 characters from stumbling across a challenge rating 12 abomination, or going into a nest of challenge rating 1/4 goblins, both of which are hiding in the city itself. The monster selection is another thing about the 5th edition adventure that might irk at least hardcore Mystara fans. Goodman brings back a lot of classic monsters, including all the ones that appeared in the original module. Then it adds monsters that weren't part of the BECMI experience, and ones that were never part of Mystara at all. Mind Flayers, Myconids, and Deep Gnomes appear in their expanded lore. If they're going to update Mystara monsters outside the module for the 5e book, why not go all the way and showcase some of the 300 plus monsters the setting already has? Find a creature with an appropriate challenge rating or one that you think is fair. The challenge rating system is mostly guesswork these days anyways. The Mind Flayer Arcanist is challenge rating 8. You can switch that out with a Kopru Sovereign from the 5th edition rework of Isle of Dread, also by Goodman Games. It's underground instead of tropical, but a major part of this area is all water and lava. It's tropical by default. Deep Gnomes don't exist in Mystara, but you could replace them with the Geonids, which are 5th edition creatures now with the Turtle package. One of the attractions of Mystara is that its monsters stand apart from the other settings. We lack many of their trademark fleshy sword sheaths. Keep that up. Your players won't know what to expect. They might be familiar with Myconids of all sorts, but what about a Dusanu? The party's going to have to deal with Zargon if they want to truly complete the adventure. I will admit I like the Goodman's art of Zargon more than the original, simply because it gives us people next to it for scale. The original art doesn't provide a sense of how tall this guy is, which is 15 foot for those curious. When I saw the original all those years ago, I thought he was several stories tall, which would have been awesome but unrealistic for the level at which the party would be facing them. Granted, I was a lot younger back then. The BECMI version will be the most brutal fight they have ever seen at this level, except for maybe the vampire they have to get past. This is back when vampires drained 2 levels per hit and couldn't be nerfed with a single spell. 5e Zargon is challenge rating 12 and acts like a rabid blender with a staggering 8 attacks, plus legendary actions, which can give it another 9 attacks on top of that. He has many other abilities that make him a TPK level event, unless the party can acquire the items that nerf him from the various factions. Still, it's refreshing to have a single boss monster that isn't going to be immediately turned into a piñata by the numerically superior party. The city that lies beneath the pyramid is left open to the DM to fill in, and much of it is trapped underground. There's a map of it, but it only has the names of the buildings, which also lacks housing from the image presented. There's an underground lake, a mushroom forest, some rough ground perfect for monsters, more mushrooms, a few more mushrooms, and of course an island in the middle of the lake, which is the only place you can put an island down there. The 5e book fleshes all of these out, but again you have the out-of-place monsters to deal with. The game does hammer home the power of friendship. As in BECMI, you need them to give you a place to heal, eat, and rest. In 5th edition, you need them to get you the nerf bats of Zargon slaying, as healing in 5e just requires a single long rest, and of course you can magically create food at first level for the entire party. The party's going to find the hideout for all the different cults here as well. The module was created to encourage DMs to add elements as they got comfortable with running the game. The first 5 levels gave you everything you needed. The next 5 gave you monsters and treasures, but you had to fill in the blanks. The city was left up to your imagination. This would be the last starter module until King's Festival many years later. The 5e version did provide an almost word-for-word conversion of the module,
but all the classic 5e problems hampered it. Pinata boss monsters, spells that negate the exploration aspect of the game, rapid healing that takes away the tension from a survival adventure, low difficulty traps that are immediately avoided with common thieves builds, saving throw difficulties at the higher levels that are almost impossible to reach unless you started with those saving throw proficiencies. That was one thing that always stuck with me. If you don't have proficiency in a saving throw, it never improves unless you spend a stat increase on it. Then it just goes up by +1. In every other edition, all your saving throws improve, though obviously not at the same rate. Not 5th edition. If you have a wisdom bonus of 0 and are a fighter, your wisdom saving throw is 0 for the next 20 levels. A player learned this trying to roll a 17 or higher against the vampire at 12th level. That's the Lost City. It's meant to be incomplete while giving you the framework to finish it. It gets away from the dungeon crawls by populating this with people you must interact with to survive the module. It's creepy, it's deadly, and if you don't have a magic weapon, it can turn into a lopsided slaughter if you encounter the wrong monster at the wrong time. The 5th edition version brought back Mystara, though only barely. It's still a decent book, though they need to provide you with the PDFs for the 21 pages of maps and pullouts in the back of the book. I'm not cutting up my copy, and I'm getting too old to be using a high school library printer. The Reincarnated series is the closest Mystara officially ever got to 5th edition, and while it's not a complete conversion, it's better than nothing.
Welcome back to Mystara, everybody. I'm Mr. Welch, and I'm finishing off my reviews of the basic series modules with this week's entry, B5 Horror on the Hill. It's a multi-part dungeon crawl. It is very much a hack-and-slash dungeon, both above and below ground. Pretty much non-stop combat, but it's also got a consistent feel to it and it encourages exploration. It's famous for dropping some monsters on the party that should have been well above their level, and if nothing else, it's pretty memorable. The module was written in 1983 by Douglas Niles, who was one of TSR's most prolific writers. He gave us The Curse of Xanathar, the genre-defining Test of the Warlords, and the high-powered hackfest Saber River. His work on Dragonlance is immense, and he did the legendary Throne of Bloodstone series. Throw in Minzo Baranzan, Skills and Powers, Mastika, Lankmar, and the Dungeoneer Survival Guide, and you will realize the man's gaming credentials are almost a mile long. His love of throwing high-powered baddies at you are on full display in Horror on the Hill, so be warned, there's going to be a lot of spoilers. The game starts off typically enough in a small settlement called Guido's Fort, which is sadly lacking any decent Italian places despite the name. It's a stock location that you can stick anywhere in your setting as long as you got it close to a large river. It's not well defined, leaving that up to the DM, but it has a range of basic buildings so you can resupply and heal if you need to retreat for a bit. And retreating is very much an option in this module. This is a classic one, and you're going to be sorely outnumbered and outclassed for quite a while. You aren't cleaning out the dungeon in a single run. The game does recognize its lethality. It throws you several bones with areas designed for the party to heal and rest. Actually, for every area where you're going to be thrown into the chaos of battle, there's a small area nearby where you can recover, where the monsters won't look for you while you sleep. From a pair of doting old women who happen to be the biggest magic shop outside of Glantry, to a convenient clearing filled with magical healing bushes, to a pristine garden in the middle of a hobgoblin hideout, with the prerequisite magic fountain the TSR was so fond of. Then if you come across a peaceful and pristine setting that seems way out of place in the dungeon, congratulations, you've just reached a save point. The main and most obvious threat in the game is the Hobgoblin camp. They are amassing to attack Guido's fort, and then you need to take out the boss to stop the imminent invasion. It's an assassination disguised as a dungeon crawl, so tell that to the paladin if it makes him feel any better about himself. So if you're going to be stabbing a lot of hobgoblins, and I mean a lot of them, they act in unison, they go on patrols, they notice if patrols start disappearing. They're smart and they're numerous. A full frontal assault earns you a TPK. The party is going to have to use tactics of their own to whittle down the hobgoblins to manageable levels. Ambushing patrols and framing it on the other residents of the island is one way. Attacking stragglers and leaving no trace is a tactic that can keep the hobgoblins hiding inside their fort, terrified of what's killing them off. Eventually you are going to need to try infiltrating, but again stealth is key. In BECMI, hobgoblins are very much one-shot mooks, but in 5th edition they are extremely well armored. Enough hit points to make one-shotting them impractical. Patience is key. You need to turn this module into a mook horror show, picking them off one at a time until you're ready to go in. Once you got a level or two under you from picking off the stragglers, you can actually take the module on in full force. Most of the monsters in the first two dungeons are just hobgoblins and goblins, pretty standard fare for low-level adventurers. Hack through the hordes, free any prisoners you encounter, grab up the loot, and sabotage the hobgoblins where you can. Remember to set up ambushes while you rile up the hobgoblins, because they are going to be pissed. And when you're done cutting down mooks, go after the big bad. The charm of the module is the Goblin King is not the final boss. There's actually a secret dungeon beneath the first one that you'll find when you finish off the chief. It's actually an ingenious way of extending the adventure. You take out the boss, think the adventure's over, and suddenly you're in a whole new dungeon that you know nothing about. There's a reason why TSR kept giving Niles a job, because he was just so good at them. The bonus dungeon is a meandering affair with a lot of random monsters, and of course including one of the safe rooms so you can rest up. There's no plot to the second dungeon. You're lost and you're just trying to get out. There's a lot of monsters down there that just live in the dungeon. They're looking for something to eat, but it's not a secret plot. You just have to cleave your way through the monsters, find your way out, all the while grabbing up what is quite a bit of nice loot. There's a lot of magical stuff in this dungeon. The third level of the dungeon starts to resemble more of a proper dungeon with more monsters who are actually easier than the first two levels. It's actually a bit of a relief from hacking down all the hobgoblins and random nasties to face a tribe of kobolds. The module has been a grind so far, so you're lucky to finally get to this level. Enjoy the cakewalk for a change, because it's not going to last. Spoiler, there's a dragon, a real one. Yes, somebody put a dragon in a module for levels 1 to 3. No, he's not friendly, he's hostile, and you're going to fight him. Niles is famous for putting in monsters well above what you'd expect for the level you're playing. And what's the last thing a party of 6 level 3 characters is expecting in a basic level modules? A red dragon. Now it's a tiny dragon, but it can still TPK the party quick if they're unlucky. Told you this module was going to be memorable. Now if you take the dragon down, you don't have to kill it, because you can beat it senseless. Then you're going to be the richest 3rd level party in D&D history. The dragon has a horde, not a big one mind you. He's not Smaug, but he's still a dragon. Remember, this is BECMI when beating dragons into submission was just a large part of the rules. That actually ties in well with the 5th edition submission rules, so the last blow isn't deadly if you don't want it to be. Now, the module is a little pricier than some of the earlier basic modules on the secondhand market. It's not too bad. You're looking at about a $30 price range for this secondhand. I've seen it go for as little as $20, but $30 is a fair price because it didn't have the print run like the older ones. The PDF will set you back $5 if you want to get in that one. It's a moderately sized module coming in at 30 pages, and it's nothing but adventure, so it makes it worth the price. Turning this module into 5th edition is tricky because the hobgoblins are lethal in 5th edition. You're going to have to pare down the numbers for some encounters or just tell the party to watch themselves, because this one's a toughie. It's hard to die in 5th, so the threat isn't that bad, but the party does stand a good chance of getting mauled in most fights. Hobgoblins are a lot harder to hit, and they got plenty of hit points in 5th edition, making them a bit of a grind. You're going to have to turn the dragon into a whelp if the party has any hope at all of surviving. If you want to spend the $1.50 and get the conversion guide from DM's Guild, it'll save you the conversion time. That's Horror on the Hill. This is going to be one of the shortest ones I've talked about because, well, it's a really short module. I mean, it's just a dungeon crawl, and I'm not going to spoil it by giving away all the details except for the one obvious one at the back. I mean, it's a straight-up dungeon crawl. It's got a surprise dungeon at the end. It's a classic D&D module because when you think you're done, there's a twist, and then there's a sudden, unexpected fight at the very end. It hits on all the cliches of the old dungeon crawls. You've got the magic fountain. You've got the magical, serene, safe spots that you can heal despite the fact that you just killed 15 hobgoblins in the next room over. The outside of the module is a bunch of hills and paths, which actually plays like an above-ground dungeon, so that was a very nice touch. So yes, it does all the cliches of the old dungeon crawls, but it does them well, especially with the safe areas, because that really helps the party not die. This is the module I'm currently playing in right now over on RPGMP3.com with Hal being the DM. So if you guys want to watch that, I'll post up the links below. So if you've been listening to this and you're part of the group, that's Tim and Becca and Leah and Nick, and now Aaron, I guess. Shame on you, you're spoiling the surprise. I've played this module several times, I've run this module several times, so I know what I'm expecting. That's why I didn't go into a lot of detail on this module, because I didn't want to spoil it for the rest of the party.
Welcome to Mystara, as I'm finishing off one of the last of my TikTok-style remasters to erase some terrible reviews I did a while back while my computer was entirely fried due to a wayward glass of water from across the room. Today's guest is one of the most original modules in the B series, if not the one that stands out the most. We're taking on the Veiled Society, the ruthless bunch of thugs out to keep the citizens of Karamikos under control. This is the only pure urban adventure from the basic line, and is also famous for being the murder mystery that gives away the killer on the cover of the module. Twice. I'm Mr. Welch, and remember, city streets don't have much pity. Veiled Society is the 6th book released in the basic series, written by Zeb Cook in '84, his only entry into that line of modules. Steve Chappell did the cover art, and Jim Rosloff did the interior art. It's a concise module with only 16 pages of adventure, but it did include 8 more pages of cut-out paper buildings that you could assemble to give your miniatures something to hide in. We didn't have a lot of fantastic medieval building terrain pieces back then, especially in the old Ralpartha scale. You might get lucky at an aquarium store, but that was a huge if, and you certainly weren't finding more than one. Your only other option was to find a 00 train scale building, and that was if you were lucky to have a local model train store that could order something outside the usual train scales. Even then, that was expensive. Having buildings for props in the 80s was a luxury, even if they were luxuries that required you to turn down the ceiling fan. This is a review for DMs running the game, so from here on out, there be spoilers. Veiled Society is a bottle adventure taking place entirely in one location, this being the capital of Keramikos, Specularum. This also brings out some of the early weirdness with the contradictions to the Grand Duchy of Keramikos, which came out a few years later. The changes are things like the population ballooning from 5,000 to 50,000. Use the gazetteer if there's a question, but most changes can be considered cosmetic, so it's not much of a problem. Remind players familiar with the setting that there's more than one Lady Magda, so the one they meet early in the module is not the one from Marilanev. This can cause some confusion for people very familiar with Keramikos, and has led to a few funny mix-ups when the DM decides to name 5 different NPCs Magda to mess with the players. The Bitter Dowager from Marilanev doesn't appear in the Veiled Society, so it's just to mess with the players' minds. This adventure stands out as the only one in the basic series that doesn't devote itself to being a dungeon crawl. There is a brief dungeon that's more of a basement crawl, but most of the module is above ground and often in the streets. There are also very few non-humans here, only with some mooks in the cellar used for labor and some surprise zombies. But on the streets of Keramikos, it's all humans. There aren't any big monsters, and you won't be looting many bodies in the middle of the road. The module has a lot of interactions with NPCs, so charisma is actually useful here. This is a great place to start a campaign if you want to use the rule cyclopedia skills. The module is arguably the one that benefits the most from the immersion treatment. The entire point is to showcase the differences between the 3 most powerful families in Keramikos. These families have very different loyalties and showcase the split between the native Traladarans and the powerful Phaeacians. For maximum enjoyment, hammer these differences home. They speak different languages. Letters from the Radu family are going to be written in Traladaran. The Vorlai communicate in Phaeacian. The Toronescu are also Traladaran, but they aren't hostile to the Phaeacians. Keep common as a trade tongue. It's based on the Phaeacian language, but you can't say much except basic concepts. It's like 2 years of Latin compared to fluency in the language. You will need characters fluent in both languages, as deciphering clues is an essential part of this adventure. How you speak to someone is just as important as what you say to them. The whole premise of Veiled Society is that Specularum is a city on edge. The Duke has left the city to run itself outside of essential law enforcement. Pay your taxes, don't kill anybody, don't burn down his capital, he's happy. It doesn't hurt that weapons are mostly illegal in the city and players have theirs tied up securely when they arrive. Magic is frowned on, and getting caught with an illegal weapon is a very bad thing. The module isn't combat light, but players must be somewhat careful if they draw steel. This means the old established powerful Radu and Toronescu are vying for power, with the newly arrived Vorlai trying to establish a foothold with the merchants. This is reflected by the city divided between the families and their foot soldiers, frequently brawling over territory and insults. The players find themselves in the middle of this when they arrive. Unless they are established citizens of Specularum, they have no dog in this fight, but that's not going to keep them out of trouble. The families see anyone who's not loyal to them as a threat. The players walk into a tinderbox in the opening scene of the adventure, when they find soldiers of the Toronescu and Radu families about to erupt into a shoving match over a religious parade. This also mimics the religious strife, as the Toronescu are honoring a saint of the Church of Keramikos, while the Radu family is firm followers of the Church of Traladara. The players can intervene on either party's behalf or remain neutral. They don't know the beef the parties have with each other yet, only that one side wants to do their religious parade and the other side objects. People get pushed around, and the scuffle is broken up quickly by the third faction. Then the players get to ask around what happened, and we'll find out the crowd is filled with supporters of all 3 sides. There's no clear good guy faction to start, and possibly no good guy faction at all. The factionalism tearing the city apart starts to become complicated as the various families approach the characters to recruit to their side individually. The party is not propositioned as a group, but the ones that seem to be the best recruits for each family will get a private offer away from the others. This can be a significant problem if different characters can't speak their native languages. You can have the NPCs provide rough translations, but they aren't going to think highly of characters that have a definite communication problem. There's a lot of room for roleplay, and since it's a low-level module, the characters might not even trust each other yet. Then we get to the most traditional part of the module, where the party wakes up at the local inn, and there's a little old lady in distress. Her basement is making weird noises, and talking to her in Chihuahua. This is a straight-up room-by-room kill-em-all. You get to rescue some naked enslaved miners. The dig-a-hole type naked enslaved miners, not the Epstein Island naked enslaved miners. Needed to make that point real clear. Then you fight some traditional bad guys, find the corpse that kicks off the actual adventure, and fight some members of the eponymous Veiled Society. The party will quickly find out that the body they discovered is about to light the powder keg that is Specularum, unless they can find out who's responsible. That leads us to the famous problem this module has. The clue left by the murder victim gives away who's responsible. On the floor, written in blood, is a partially spelled out Radu. The module tells you that the spelling could be R-A-D, R-A-O, B-A-D, B-A-O, or similar, but it's obvious which of the three families has had her killed. Plus, the Radu family is mentioned as a suspect in both the front and back cover of the module screen. If the players have been paying any amount of attention, it's obvious who she's indicating, and none of the NPCs they have met have names anywhere close to the possible spellings. It sets the characters on the path of the obvious suspect, which happens to be the actual killer. To make it a little harder, change the writing on the floor to B-O-E, which happens to be the first three letters of one of the killer's last names. That way, the party has to at least work for it. Then the party gets to watch as the city erupts in a riot. This can end in several ways, including them being drawn and quartered without trial. Avoid that option if possible. The Radu supporters blame the Tornescu for the murder of the woman the party found. They are looking for blood, and one agitator is egging the crowd on. There's no way to end this peacefully like at the beginning of the module. The town guard will arrive on horseback to break up the mob, and one thrown rock later, it's a full-blown riot. The party can lead the rioters in a small-scale battle, chase down the agitator who flees as soon as the riot starts, or just try and get out of the way. Most of these end badly, and there will be deaths on both sides. The ducal forces will win this one. If you defeat the 30 horsemen that first arrive, then 60 soldiers show up, and then more if necessary. The party needs to be anywhere else but in that riot. The party can find the hideout of the Veiled Society if they play their cards right, which gives away a good chunk of the actual plot, but doesn't get the party any closer to proving anything because it doesn't provide any physical evidence. They just know one of the places they normally meet now. What happens next depends on who tried and recruited the various party members at the start of the adventure. Who the individual characters sided with could end up with player-on-player combat if they don't realize what's happening. A powerful Tornescu noble needs an escort, and the Veiled Society want him dead. The players get to meet the surprisingly powerful Beggars Guild if they're protecting the noble, or they get to fight the surprisingly powerful Beggars Guild if they are now part of the Veiled Society. The characters will be contacted independently of each other by the factions they encountered earlier, so there's no time to warn each other of what's about to go down. The party will be rewarded, whether the noble lives or dies, with another Veiled Society ambush. Those who helped with the assassination will be deemed to know too much to live. Regardless, the party is in for a tough fight and a harrowing chase as they try to catch the leader of the ambush. This leads right to another Veiled Society hideout, and straight into one of the deadliest parts of any basic module. There are a lot of Veiled Society thugs here, far more than the party, and worse, they congregate together, making killing one for his outfit quite a challenge. The party has to rely on stealth. Even with magic spells, they are badly outnumbered. They have to be patient. If they wait, even as they watch a murder, the encounter will become winnable because all the mooks leave. If they don't, it's a massive scrum where the party is outnumbered 3-1. The boss battle is challenging, as the big bad is level 6. They will get help from a 3rd level fighter, but still, taking down the final boss will be a serious chore. Especially if the party is still 1st level because you're running this module as an introductory. The head of Clan Radu has a magic sword and a decent bonus to hit and damage. You may lose party members here, the boss is just that powerful. After their fight, their would-be ally tries to turn them to the side of the Veiled Society, as the party has managed to get rid of all the other leaders of Clan Radu. Naturally, he's going to run the Veiled Society as his own army. He's not a good guy in any sense of the word. That leads to a problem if you're running Karamikos and want to keep Anton Radu around as a villain. The set ending of Veiled Society has the Radu family condemned to death by the Duke, and all known members of the Veiled Society also earn a death sentence. But Anton Radu is a major big bad in Karamikos. He's still kicking over a decade later in canon. If Veiled Society goes off as written, the family ceases to be. A significant party villain dies, and the Ducal Guard hunts down his criminal gang. Even if the party lets their prisoner go or he bribes him to his side, Anton Radu is still dead. It's a tough call how you want to handle these changes if you want a Karamikos campaign. I would suggest ramping up the Veiled Society assets and running this module when the characters are at a higher level. The bad guys are primarily human. Giving them more numbers or higher levels wouldn't be hard. If you're looking for a copy, one will run you at least $50 for an authentic original copy. You can get the POD version for $12, though you will need to make a copy of the map inside the cover. The paper buildings have long been made irrelevant by all the new toys we've created in the last 20 years, so don't worry about them outside of nostalgia. Cardboard tiles and resin buildings are far more durable than paper anyway, and quite affordable. One thing to watch out for is people selling reprints for original prices. I I noticed numerous examples on the various resale sites. One guy wanted $50 for a reprint. You can buy that brand new for, like I said, $12. He even claimed to have it graded mint condition. That's a borderline scam. If you're unsure because the image is of poor quality if it's a reprint or not, ask for a picture of just the screen by itself. That's Veil Society. It throws out everything you know about low-level play and gives you a tight mystery that's a little too easy for players. But when it comes to survival, there's nothing like throwing a riot up against an army with the characters in the middle. Play it at your own risk. One of the best bosses I ever had gave me the job of fixing somebody else's screw-up, and I thought I was being punished. He told me that no, I was the best man for the job, and though this issue was not my fault, it was my problem, and that's why he hired me. That's why this video is about 4 days late from when I actually wrote it. But that problem has been resolved. I am ready to go, and let's get on it. Welcome to Mystara for a remaster covering of all things the module that inspired this channel. I'm talking about the module B7, Rahasia. Just the name. Rahasia. Rahasia. I don't know, it just sounds musical. I wanted to see a video on this module all those years ago, only there weren't any. As far as I can tell, my video is still the only one about it. Thus, Welcome to Mystara was born. And now we have a video about Rahasia, a module whose backstory takes up more space than the actual module itself. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we are starting at the beginning 5 years later. Rahasia is actually the second module printed in the Basic series in 1979, just ahead of Keep on the Borderlands, but after In Search of the Unknown. So why is Rahasia module B7 compared to the Keep's B2? Because Rahasia wasn't printed by TSR originally. This is the work by Laura Hickman, with her husband Tracy helping write the sequel Black Opal Eye. TSR later merged both books into the Rahasia module we know now. Their game company, Daystar West Media, only produced 2 modules, with Rahasia and Pharaoh, before going out of business. Then it was absorbed into TSR, which was more interested in hiring the Hickmans than acquiring their past works. You cannot overstate the influence of the Hickmans on D&D game design. Instead of walking into the dungeon and starting to stab people like In Search of the Unknown or Keep on the Borderlands, Rahasia had a plot. You had a strong motivation for being there. TSR was in flux during the early years. Module design changed from fill-in-the-blank, choose-your-own-adventure dungeon crawls like B1 and Palace of the Silver Princess to ones already filled out for you. Then the Hickmans changed it again by actually giving modules a coherent plot, past, kill, loot, heal, repeat. This was the only module they did that ended up in Mystara, but I hear they did some work on other modules that got turned into other lesser-known settings, something about Raven Lances and Dragon Lofts or similar. There are 4 versions of this module, none of which are Return to Rahasia or anything like the other nostalgia bait TSR was leaning on heavily into the 1990s. The first one, as I mentioned, was created by Daystar West Media, and you aren't going to find a copy. The last one I found for sale went for thousands. Then you have the tournament modules that were RPGA 1 and RPGA 2. Note I said modules, as in plural. Tracy helped write a sequel to the original Rahasia called Black Opal Eye, and both of these were merged to create the B7 version later. Then the module was reprinted again with the compilation In Search of Adventure. The RPGA modules are pretty expensive to buy, also running into the thousands. But you can find a B7 module for a little more than $20 on eBay, and there's always the POD from drive-thru. As I said, this module has a ton of backstory. As with all my remasters, there is nothing but spoilers from here on out, because you want to hear the juicy parts of the book. Besides, it's decades old. The spoiler tag fell off a long time ago. The title of the module is a fair elven maiden whose boyfriend has been kidnapped by the evil Rahib, along with several other elven maidens, and she needs you to find him. It's the reversal of the old, your princess is in another castle shtick, and it works reasonably well. You can always try to convince the elf babe he's just not worth it, but that's never worked. If you're interested in what Rahasia means, it's the Indonesian word for secret. The module uses several words from the Indonesian language, though the art doesn't reflect the influence. There's a bit of continuity issue on where the module is placed, as TSR shoehorned the module into Mystara, since the setting didn't exist when the Hickmans first wrote the module. In Search of Adventure says put it in Darrican, but there's no elves around Darrican in that region. And another suggestion was placing it in Karamikos with the Kalari elves. The first recommendation says it's because of the Arabic vibe of the module, but I think the editor of that one didn't realize the module's influence is Indonesian, not Arabic. Minor difference there. Doesn't matter where you put it, you need a place with some elves and a hidden temple. There's no official canon location, and Rahasia never appears again in any book. The theme of the adventure is that looks can be deceiving. Except for Rahasia. She's a total babe, which means she's pure good and perfect in every way. At least that's what you get from your entire 5-minute encounter with her. That was a significant complaint when I ran this module. She's the title character. Her face is dead center on the cover. The intro makes a massive deal with her letter and your face-to-face meeting with her. She escorts you to the temple on the next page, wishes you luck, and then goes back to reading the Silmarillion or whatever elves do when they subcontract stuff. Seriously, she bows out on the second actual page of the adventure. Doesn't even wave goodbye or validate parking. The module setting is a dungeon crawl, as this is a basic adventure, and that's the standard plot for almost every module in this setting. This time it's the hidden Siswa temple, with Siswa being the Indonesian word for student. Rahasia tells you beforehand that the Siswa are being mind-controlled, so don't kill them. That was a problem back in BECMI because, unlike the more accommodating editions of D&D, knocking people out was a chore, especially since hit points were much lower, and setting your great axe to stun was a lot trickier compared to 5th edition. Making things even more fun is that the Siswa are elves, so they're immune to the sleep spell. No easy captives for you. The module takes the no-kill rule very seriously. If you forget to mention you are striking to subdue and accidentally kill one, it docks your XP instead of rewarding you. The module can be pretty unforgiving. Several monsters require magic weapons to hit, including a gargoyle that you can encounter early. Remember, this is for levels 1 to 3, but you might want to play another adventure first that gets the party some magic weapons or loot to give them a chance. The fights aren't mandatory if the party plays it smart, but if everyone gets delusions of grandeur at first level, this is going to be a real short adventure. The mooks are numerous, many of them cast spells, and they are all entirely brainwashed. Something that players will have to deal with in Rahasia more than other modules is puzzles. The Hickmans love puzzles. Sadistic, challenging puzzles you have to pay attention to, or you're dealing with a total party kill. Just ask the group I ran for North Texas Tabletop Con a few years back. They had a DM no-show, and I made the mistake of walking past with a rule cyclopedia and a signed copy of Rahasia. One quick Shanghai later, and I was running the module with 5 minutes of prep time and handcuffed to a chair. The party got impatient, greedy, and dead about 2/3 of the way through the module. The traps and puzzles in this module have been duplicated numerous times. If you've ever played Curse of Strahd, you might remember the puzzle dealing with the Wizard of Wines. This is the module that puzzle first appeared in. They didn't even change the wines' names. They just scrubbed off the puzzle code on the bottom that appeared in Rahasia. There's a lot of clues and riddles given to the party that are essential to finish the adventure. The party will need to write the clues down when they find them, because you're not going to find them at the actual puzzle. Answering some of the puzzles wrong will result in very bad things. This module is often lethal for players who can't pay attention. The module's biggest surprise is the Rahib isn't the big bad. He's the big bad's deputy. The bigger surprise is there's multiple big bads in the form of the 3 witches. They possess a pair of comely elven maidens, with the 3rd witch waiting to lure Rahasia into the dungeon so she can be possessed. Killing the elf maidens are a bad thing, and it costs you XP. And worse, it doesn't kill the witches either. The witches return to the magic talisman that hold their souls until they can find a body. If you have a Randy Bard type in the party, keep him on a short leash, or he will get everyone killed. If you haven't noticed, Rahasia is not a starter module. It is complicated and it is deadly. And just because it's low level, doesn't mean it's noob friendly. If you're running the module, familiarize yourself with it for a few days. The temple is vast, far more extensive than most dungeons of the same level. Compared with the beginner-friendly module, King's Festival, which walks the party through 30 rooms, Rahasia has a staggering 84 rooms. Both of these modules are the same length at 32 pages. Rahasia has almost triple the number of rooms compared to most other basic modules of the same length. Only Lost City outdoes it with 100 rooms, and that's only if you include the lower levels, which are not given any detailed descriptions. The closest module of that size dungeon is Ravenloft, also by the Hickmans, which has 88 rooms. The Hickmans love big dungeons and they cannot lie. You other adventurers can't deny. If you've never run a game before, this is not the module for you. This is for dungeon masters that can keep track of a relatively detailed plot involving lots of NPCs and their schemes, coupled with some rather complicated traps and dozens of rooms, including a very confusing teleport maze. Players have to solve several puzzles without apparent answers, navigate the same teleport maze, and figure out how to get past monsters well past their abilities through guile. And furthermore, restrain themselves against large numbers of mind-controlled enemies. It also helps if they know how to map and don't get turned around easily. Hickman modules might be classics, but they didn't pussyfoot around with the difficulty. While I'm warning you about prepping this module more than others, you will need to do something about Rahasia's letter. On older versions of the module, the seal that takes up a large section of the letter behind the message makes it hard to read. Look for online versions of the letter that corrects this problem. The 3 witches are classic villains that you can reuse for later adventures. They're evil spirits with no physical bodies, meaning they can turn up as anybody later. The Rahib is disposable. His survival doesn't impact the story other than the gratification you get for putting paid to a bad guy. The villains are clever and have laid out numerous traps that will kill off the stupid, greedy, or horny, and the best you can do is banish the witches if you beat the module. They will play to the party's heroism. The large doe-eyed elf maidens they possess will help a lot with that aspect. While they aren't meant to fight the party one-on-one, they can sow mistrust because they can possess victims. They can have at least one elf maiden lying around as a backup plan, which can cause all sorts of arguments when the party finds her. This is a tournament module, one from the very early days of TSR. It's meant to be complicated. Party wipes are very possible and almost expected. The idea back then was to see how far a party could make it into the dungeon before they wipe, and then compare their progress to everybody else at the convention who also ran Rahasia. Compared to 5th edition's low-level modules, this is a meat grinder which will turn off players used to the more pillow-fisted modern adventures. There are even die-no-save traps, but to fall for those, you gotta be really gullible. If you go after the obvious bait that this module throws at you, you deserve your fate. Then again, when I got roped into running the module last time, that's where my party wiped, and these were veteran grognards. I expected better, guys. Rahasia is a timeless module, but it's not for everybody. It's very old school, being from the 70s and all. It has boxed text that was the hallmark of early TSR adventures. It can be somewhat confusing if the players don't know how to map, especially with all the teleporting. The trick is the players don't realize they're teleporting. They have to figure it out on their own. The adventure punishes players for idiotic mistakes, and it's unapologetic about it. If your players want a challenge, grab it, but make sure they know what they're in for first.
Get your hiking boots on. It's Welcome to Mystara with Mr. Welch. This week's adventure is B8, Journey to the Rock. This is the second to the last of the B series left to be reviewed, and it's also one of the shortest. This is the only B series module that's entirely a wilderness adventure. It's also very much a tournament module, and it is one of the quickest modules to play because while it's the same size as the other modules, it's 3 separate routes to the same location and you don't double back. So you get to play a third of the module at one sitting. Throw in a nonsensical plot, and there's a reason why this module isn't very well regarded. The module was written in 1984 by Michael Malone. This was his only credit I could find for TSR. It's known for being packed with new monsters, as well as a lot of monsters in total. It's one of the common complaints of the module. It's a total grind. You get to the mission, you get pick one of the 3 paths, and off you go. Then you just kill everything between you and the end of the path that's the module. You've got veteran players, you can speedrun this module in a night. It's that simple of an adventure. It reads like something you would get out of a dungeon magazine. The start of the module is pretty simplistic. You're walking along, a merchant rides up, hires you, you go to a manor, you get the adventure synopsis. And it's not much of a synopsis to follow, it's pretty much a fetch quest. There's a lot of background to the module. It's half a page actually, and it's all wasted. There's a story about a lost city that's been banished to another plane of existence, and the only way to restore it after thousands of years of exile is to go to the rock and bring back the MacGuffin. So what's supposed to be an epic quest to return a city lost, banished from the world boils down to a simple quest up a single path by a bunch of beginning level characters. I don't think too hard about that one. So you got 3 paths to pick from. What's the difference? Well, there's no way to tell at the start of the path. You come to the 3-way junction and you get to pick one at random. There's the west path, the north path, and the south path. There's nothing stopping you from doubling back, but in practice, once you've started along the path, the adventure is set. The trails never merge until the very, very end, so treat each one as their own little mini adventure. There's actually 2 endings as well. The DM gets to pick which one. The endings are the same, it's just one has combat and the other doesn't. Each path is 6 or 7 encounters. Most of them have an unavoidable combat, and they encourage wandering monsters because they have some pretty heavily populated bad guy charts. They tend to have some sort of challenge you can avoid, with the party running along a toll booth or a large tribe demanding tribute. Those challenges are intentionally overpowered. Choosing to fight is the bad idea. The southern path takes you through the ghostly city, which makes the most interesting, even if it's because of a magic setting. The actual encounter is just a whole bunch of saving throws with no damage, just several party members running in fear. So once you get past the half-dozen encounters, all paths lead to the rock. You'd think there would be an epic encounter waiting for you to free the lost city of Tuma, but no, it's just a single encounter straight out of a bad 80s film. Anyone who has a lick of common sense isn't going to fall for the ploy. Even the most randy bard is going to see this trap for what it is. You walk up the path, there's a mostly naked lady chained to a rock begging for the party to free her. No monster around, no obvious reason why she's chained there. If that doesn't scream trap, what does? I would call this a spoiler, but it's so bloody obvious it doesn't even make for a good jump scare. So So after the monster reveals itself and you defeat her, you go to the next encounter, and that's where the endings come into play. Ending A is the combat ending. You walk into the room and suddenly the statues animate and attack. Kill the statues, win the game. Ending B is the puzzle ending. It's another obvious puzzle because it was duplicated in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Now the module predates the movie by 5 years, so you can assure the players the puzzle wasn't ripped off from the movie. But you come across a bunch of fancy items and one plain one, and they tell you to pick the right one. The answer is always the plain one. Seriously, it's a dead giveaway. Only this scene doesn't have the awesome Julian Glover to showcase what happens when you pick the wrong item. How is that man not more famous? Seriously, he's been in Star Wars, Doctor Who, James Bond, Game of Thrones, and of course Indiana Jones. I even interviewed him once. He didn't even try out for the role of the main bad guy in Last Crusade. They called him up and offered him the job. He's just a classic British villain who doesn't get enough credit. If you see him at a convention, go up and squee on him. He's been a major part of geekdom for decades, and it's a shame he's not considered a major draw. That sounds like I'm rambling. You're right. I'm trying to do a review for a module with at most 9 scripted encounters. The average adventure in a Dungeon magazine has more encounters than Journey to the Rock. Every other module I've reviewed, when I finally got through the meat of the module, I'd written out at least 3 pages of notes. I'm just now over a page, not right now. This is going to be the shortest review by far because there's nothing to talk about. Seriously, Kill Bargle in Dungeon Magazine 150 is half the page count and double the adventure, at least. So I'm not going to pad this review. It's ridiculously short and there's not much in the way of a plot. It's barely a one-shot. You have nothing planned for the night, but this might keep the players entertained, but it's more of a distraction than a module. Parts of it are well written, but there's not enough parts to make for a good adventure. By the time you've gotten into the module, it's over. You can increase the length by stringing the paths together, but even then it's just a slog. If you want to buy the module, it's $30 for a hard copy. It's a bit of a rare module, even though it's not that much in demand. From the old reviews, it wasn't well received back then either. If you want to get the PDF, that's $5 on the usual sites. I recommend the PDF, probably for the first time ever. The module just is not worth $30. There's not enough material in it to justify that price tag. You can snag it on a sale or an actual auction on eBay, put in a low bid and hope for the best. That's Journey to the Rock. It's a short diversion with a generic plot hook. This is a stripped out, glorified adventure hook. It introduces a slew of new monsters: the Sand Spider, the Chronic Chaos, Chameleon Men, the Winged Warrior, Rock Men, Ghostly Horde, and the Water Weird. But you won't encounter all of them because they were split evenly among the paths. To make the module even faster, you're given horses at the start of the module. That's it. That's the module. If you want to convert this to 5th edition, it's pretty much plug and play. Most of the monsters you need to convert to 5th edition because they aren't in that edition. If you want, just replace them with 5e monsters to fit the bill. You want to set it in Mystara. It's obviously meant to be placed in Yalarum from the art design, but even then it's not a good fit because the Lost City predates Blackmoor, which screws with the timeline. Welcome back to Mystara, everybody. It's the last of the B series, 1985's Castle, Caldwell, and Beyond. I'm not going to review the compilation module In Search of Adventure because I've covered all 9 modules contained within it, and all it does is reprint them while shaving off several scenes, like removing the keep from the Keep on the Borderlands. The B series ended with 12 modules total, 13 if you count the solo module Ghost of Lion Castle. Castle Caldwell is considered by many to be truly the last of the B series because B10 branches into the expert set, and indeed it was a hybrid called B/X1 in the UK where it was written. And King's Festival and Queen's Harvest were both written several years after Castle Caldwell when TSR was trying to restart that module line. So I'm Mr. Welch and we are talking about Castle Caldwell. The module isn't well regarded by many players and more than a few reviewers. First off, it's an anthology module. There's 5 adventures contained within, all obviously very short because you're not going to fit large adventures in a 30-page module if you have to share it with 4 other adventures. The module states every single adventure was designed to be played in a single night. With the module might not be expansive, it is perfect for one-shots, sort of. The adventures go up in difficulty as you progress. The clearing of Castle Caldwell is a step up from a cakewalk, while the Sanctuary of Elowin the Ardent is the largest and the most difficult. The module has been criticized for its randomly silly names. For whatever reason, the author of the module used the pseudonym Harry W. Knuckles, which is Harry Knuckles for those who are slow to catch jokes. Frank Mincer named the actual author as Ron Chorulski, making his debut in the module writing business. Mincer later denied saying this according to an article, but I haven't found anything else to prove the veracity of the statement one way or the other. The module itself is obviously named after TSR artist Clyde Caldwell, and that's his handiwork on the cover. Much of the model is considered to be silly, like having to repeat the magic words, "Oh, what a goose I am," to get out of the dungeon. Alright, this is where I break from common wisdom. Having researched this module, I found out the module was actually compiled from adventures written by Chorulski for his sons and his friends. It's written for 8-year-olds. When you view it in that light, the module suddenly makes a lot more sense. The adventures are short. You're not going to send 3rd graders on an epic quest, or you're going to lose their attention. There's jokes galore. Again, this is to entertain children. There's no mature themes. The monsters are easy to beat. When you look at the module in that light, it changes completely. The issue with the module is it was marketed towards adults when it should have been put out as the first kid-friendly module. I put the failure of this module on marketing. It's like that Doctor Who episode in The Forest of the Night, the one where the trees saved the world with a bunch of kids helping. I didn't care for that one at first, but then I watched a pack of gamer progeny at the store I worked at stare enraptured at the TV for an entire hour, and I realized that I wasn't the target audience of that product. Okay, so with the caveat that this is an introductory module written for third graders, here's a rundown of the adventure. Clearing of Castle Caldwell is a generic dungeon crawl. Party is hired by Cliff Caldwell to clear out the castle he just bought. It's a one-floor dungeon with some minor monsters, mostly goblins and kobolds that you'll one-shot. There's a few non-combatants around as well, so the kids don't automatically assume they need to slaughter every living creature they come across. They'll learn to do that later, like when they're like 1 XP from leveling, so they decide to bleach the entire floor to kill off all the microscopic organisms, hoping they get one worth 1 XP. And you gotta teach those kids young. It's pretty much a room-by-room eviction adventure. You don't have to kill the baddies, you just got to get them to leave. They aren't all bad guys in the modules because the goblins and bandits running an Airbnb, so there's some merchants who rented out some rooms there, and an evil cleric who's actually surprisingly agreeable. There's no names attached to anybody. It's trader number 1 and cleric or bandit leader. Like, keep on the Borderlands, you get to name them as you want. It's a generic castle that you can stick anywhere in your setting. There's a magically locked door that the party can't open, but that leads us to the Dungeons of Terror. Okay, the Dungeon of Terror. It's a single dungeon. Don't know why they went plural on the title. I guess just for dramatic effect. Cliff calls you back, say he's finally got that door open and there's a trap door that needs exploring. You head back and go to the second level of the castle. We're dungeon crawling. The first thing the module does is destroy the trust forever of small children. Spoilers, it throws a doppelganger at you as soon as you walk through the door. And this is a module for children. Told you get to train them early to trust nothing. I mean, come on, the word is German for your evil twin. Now, unless the kids speak Deutsch, they're not going to know that running into someone who looks a lot like you and is extremely friendly and clingy is a very bad thing. Actually, in real life, that applies as well. So after you've given them years of trust issues, you get to clearing out the dungeon. This one's an extremely short dungeon. It's only 15 rooms with a lot more combat than the first adventure. It's got a white for the baddie, and these are first level adventures, so it means 1 hit, 1 kill. Fortunately, there's a lot of magic items to be found in the first 2 adventures, but remember, a few good rolls and you've wiped out half the party. The next 3 adventures aren't related at all to the first 2. They're completely standalone. And again, they're designed to be played in a single night. The kidnapping of Princess Sylvia, is the classic rescue of the princess plot. It's also the one that thinks owlbears use halberds. Well, at least in the artwork. I'm not sure how that's supposed to look like an owl's head. This is a tiny 1-level dungeon with lots of goblins running around and an evil wizard there to cackle sinisterly as the party explores the dungeon. When you actually get to the end and find out the big baddie does have an owlbear, but unfortunately this one doesn't have a halberd. Then you get to the 4th adventure and you try to break out of a Nazi prison death camp with Steve McQueen, David Attenborough, James Coburn, Charles Bronson, Donald Pleasance, and James Garner in The Great Escape. Or instead you just get put in a typical get-out-of-prison adventure. You know the routine. Wake up in a jail cell, no gear. It's just a stupid jailer. You get to stealth your way back to your gear, make your escape. It's a generic dungeon crawl. Nobody's named, and you're supposed to customize it to fit your campaign. They just happen to name it The Great Escape. You don't get to name a module The Great Escape unless it's got a motorcycle and barbed wire, and it's situated on the border of Switzerland. The last adventure is The Sanctuary of Elwyn the Ardent, and it's got the generic The Villain is Secretly a Woman twist, which doesn't mean anything today. But in the 80s, this was still years before Samus Aran was a thing. Shocking 8-year-olds with equal opportunity bad guys was still a thing back in the 80s. Of course, now you get told certain groups can't be bad guys because we might hurt their feelings because, of course, reasons. Don't get me started on people whining that their special little identification automatically makes them and anyone like them good guys because they have a persecution complex and can't handle complex characters that might share some traits with them but still be villains because we don't want our feelings hurt. Life sucks. Wear a helmet. Where was I? Oh yeah, children's adventure. So the Sanctuary is a treasure hunt module, starting with an ambush. When you kill the bad guys, you find the treasure map. Module is a bit of a disguised railroad. The dungeon is actually a spiral pattern like a shell, so there's only one path through the dungeon. I actually don't mind that. It gives at least a legit reason why you have to go in order because the engineer had a thing for mollusks. Adds at least a little flavor when you're crawling through a conch-shaped dungeon. The module is short, just like all the rest, and it's fairly easy. It does give them a dragon to slay, a tiny little black dragon that's chained and sleeping, so they get a free round to treat it like a piñata before they have a decent fight on their hands. The big boss is a level 6 cleric, but she's pretty nerfed, so that's not much of a problem. And that's the module. 5 quick and easy adventures. It's meant for kids. There's a lot to read. There's not a lot to read, rather. The plot is basic. The enemy's lightweight. You reach high school age, you're going to find the module simplistic. Now, if you're a parent with small children that wants to play with you, this is the module you want. Nothing too difficult. Covers most of the basic adventure types. Keep in mind that when you look at that in the module, this is not Castle Amber or Knight's Dark Terror. This is Baby's First Broadsword. Now, so much for playing the Apologist. The module has numerous typos and some serious formatting issues, especially towards the back. The font seems to change page for page. Some of the lines overlap each other on different pages. This gives the appearance of a rushed job, something TSR was just trying to get on the shelves without too much effort, without actually playtesting the module. The fact it was written towards kids and sold to the adults doesn't help the module's reputation at all. Physical copy is not cheap. This seems to be the norm for the later B-Series modules. $40 to $50 seems to be the going rate for a module that isn't well regarded. $5 is the PDF price as usual. And for only the second time, go for the PDF if you need a copy, unless you can find one on sale. The module is a curiosity because of the story behind its creation, but there's a lot better modules to play. And that's Castle Caldwell and Beyond. It's not one of TSR's better moments. If you have to play it in 5th edition, just plug and play the monsters. All the dungeons are single level. There's not a lot of danger at all except for certain monsters. It's for kids. If your kid wants to play a game, sure, grab one of the 5 adventures and run it. Gets them away from the video game for a few hours and lets them use their imagination. That's not a bad thing. That raises the module from just bad to just flawed.
There are 3 types of D&D players in the world. Those who have not yet read Knight's Dark Terror, those that think it's one of the best modules ever written, and those that are wrong. This module is the crown jewel of BECMI as well as Mystara. It has achieved legendary status for the sheer amount of material you find in it, and the cheek-clenching prices you will pay for a complete vintage copy. When you get to page 6, the module throws you into one of the greatest battles in D&D history, and then it never takes its foot off the gas. Welcome to Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we're going straight to the top. Knight's Dark Terror was the love child of TSR UK mainstays Jim Bambra, Graham Morris, and Phil Gallagher. In the US, the module has the code B10, but in the UK, it's coded as module BX1. The UK version is the rarer of the two, though finding either intact these days requires a lot more patience and a lot more money. The game was printed in 1986 and is the longest module at the time with 64 pages, 8 of those being a pull-out section. Brian Williams did the cover art, Helen Bedford drew the interior art. But that doesn't even begin to cover what the module gives you physically. Be warned, from here on out, there will be spoilers. The first thing the party will encounter in this module is a settlement under attack, the legendary siege at Sekuskin. It's the party, a few settlers, against 85 attacking goblins. I didn't stutter. Your party of 3rd level adventurers has to fight off waves of goblins, including several wolf riders. They are behind the settlement's walls, so that does somewhat mitigate the goblins' numbers, but they will be retreating to more defensible positions several times in this battle. And the module gives you a massive fold-out map for the entire settlement and die-cut counters for every single goblin in the battle. For those thinking that you just need to replace the nigh impossible to find counters with the new cheap miniatures you can get these days, you're going to need 5 leaders, 8 wolf riders, and 72 infantry. You ain't getting out of spending a lot of money on Knight's Dark Terror. The siege is the first significant encounter in the book. It was like nothing else any module had ever thrown at you before. What did you get from similar modules? Hey, here's a mysterious cave. What's inside of it? Or here, have a treasure map. No, there's none of that. It's, okay, you cross a river and see some goblins. How many goblins? 7. Oh, we can handle that. Dozen. Everybody run! The module doesn't let go for a second. You get a few breather moments, but that's to lure you into a false sense of security before the next battle. Each combat is at an increasingly more dramatic location. There's ship-to-ship combat in a battle against the Iron Ring. You get ambushed in the narrow streets of Fogor Island. An epic struggle in an ancient ruins with a minotaur lurking in an invisible maze. Then it ends in a lost valley that changes history. And that's just skimming past all the secondary encounters. Knight's Dark Terror helped shape what would become the known world by giving us a ground-level introduction to Karamikos. Instead of a few paragraphs here and there, it showed how people lived daily. Much of this would be absorbed into the Karamikos Gazetteer, with a few minor changes like the spelling of the city of Kevlin. It gave us a tour of Threshold and a fleeting glimpse of Riflian. It gave us part of the Mystaran calendar, and even a weather chart, though I don't think either of those survived conversion intact. It gave us the rules for natural healing, which was left out of BECMI and the Rule Cyclopedia. Even then, it was just a hit point a day with complete bed rest. They never did get that right. So remember to bring a cleric. The module introduced one of the best D&D villain groups with the Iron Ring, the slaver guys that are hell-bent on raiding villages for victims. They never did say who they sold all their slaves to, except for the Black Eagle Barony, but that's not a very large location for the number of slaves these guys are moving. The Iron Ring gets an organizational breakdown. You meet several other leaders and their leader replacements if you manage to off one during the adventure. They aren't stupid bad guys, though their basic foot troops have no purpose other than cannon fodder. It's okay, kill all you want. They'll make more. They are cruel, intelligent, and seemingly everywhere. The best part about the Iron Ring is it doesn't matter what you do to them. You don't feel bad about it in the morning. The module has a well-earned reputation for being tightly written, with barely enough time for the players to catch their breath. It's fairly linear, but it doesn't feel forced. The reason behind this is the bulk of the module is a chase. Either the bad guys have the MacGuffin, in which case the party has to go after them to get it back, or the party has the MacGuffin, and the bad guys are nipping at their heels. Even when they get to a rest area, they aren't safe. The bad guys really want that MacGuffin. If they're behind, there's no time to rest. The party will fight, crawl, and wrestle their way past the finish line and never feel like they didn't have a choice. This is because they're up against an organization, not random mooks. Kill one of the leaders, and another one steps in to take his place. The Iron Ring has several groups between the party and the goal. They aren't facing the same bad guy over and over again. Every time the Iron Ring finds them, it's a new boss leading the fight. The slavers communicate with each other. If the party lets some get away, they will find the next bunch of slavers have been informed on what to expect and will adjust their tactics. The Iron Ring will try different methods to get to the party. If brute force fails, the next group will try stealth. The party will be so done with the Iron Ring by the time this module is over that the final battle will be personal. While the party will grow to hate the Iron Ring, they will get to know the various NPCs they encounter in the adventure. The inhabitants of Sekuskan are written as actual people. They have chores to do if their lives aren't in danger. They will make small talk with the party. Piotr will ask the party for advice and give it if necessary. They will address the party members by name and generally try to be memorable and realistic. They grieve if some of their numbers are slain. If the goblins threaten to break in, the able-bodied will throw themselves into battle to give the less capable time to find a safer place to retreat to. But remember, it's a siege. There's not many safe places you can go. By the time the first act is finished, the party will have been adopted into Piotr's clan whether they want to or not. Not all the NPCs will be your friend. Some will use you to get what they want. Loken the Cheval, a fey creature that protects horses, needs the party's help, but he's not their friend. If you impress him and complete the tasks he gives you, his attitude does change from openly sarcastic to only talking bad behind you about your back. You're a tool to him. You're never going to be anything more than a tool to him. The only reason why you're talking to him is you both have something that the other needs. Sergeant Arthal might appreciate any information about the Iron Ring's activities and threshold, but he still expects the party to follow the law. Even many bad guys can act intelligently or have motivations the parties can take advantage of. The goblin tribes attack the settlement all have different levels of motivation and competence. One follows the orders of the Iron Ring without question, while another is happy to hang back and let the others do the majority of the fighting. The third just wants loot and is satisfied with whatever they can steal. You can come across some bandits that have acquired the horses the goblins stole during the siege. You can fight them, but they're reasonable and they will sell the horses back to the party if someone brings them up. They're happy with gold no matter how they earn it. If the party looks weak, they attack. The fun part is the party's guide will argue against both the party and the bandits as he doesn't want to pay to get his property back. Hope at least one character didn't use charisma as a dump stat. There's no generic monsters in Night's Dark Terror. It plays up the tribes of goblins, orcs, and gnolls as different groups, each with its customs, tactics, and superstitions. The Jagadash goblins have no stomach for a prolonged fight. The Clawslunk goblins are more aggressive, even turning on the other goblin tribes when the opportunity presents itself. You will know who each tribe is by their markings. They aren't just regular goblins. Some of them have reputations that precede them. If the party sees the heads on spikes that are the calling card of the Galt Kalat gnolls, the party knows they're in grave danger, and they had best move quickly. The final act has the party in way over their head. They're being chased by hundreds of gnolls who don't like anyone on their territory. Throw in the Iron Ring either right behind them or ahead of the party, and the enemies surround the characters. Then they get to the biggest twist in Mystara, the Lost Valley of the Hutaka. This entire chase to find a hidden treasure leads the party into an isolated valley filled with hundreds of devolved humans and jackal-headed humanoids who hate each other. Both see the party as the element that tips the balance of power. They're trapped in an even-sided battle of genocide which has lasted for centuries. Like many others in this adventure, they see the party as tools, and disposable tools at that. The party must deal with the ancient and bitter rivalries between the two races, as they both want the party to clean out an undead-filled temple. The party has to go into a straight-on dungeon crawl, though a small one, but it also will discover the true history of the region, the two races, and what really happened in the earliest part of Trollodara's past. This kind of information will cause significant religious turmoil if it gets back to the churches of Karamikos. Of course, the party's erstwhile ally will want to get rid of the party and take all the treasure for themselves, but if this wasn't obvious during the first meeting with the Hutakans or the Traldar, the party wasn't paying attention. That will add to the tension, because they do need the help of the valley's inhabitants. But the players know that the party can't trust their allies, and they're going to be betrayed. To make matters worse, there's a lot of treasure in that temple, far more than what the party can carry. There are electrum bars worth tens of thousands of gold in total. They also weigh 70 pounds each. Good luck getting the jewel-encrusted ebony throne out of the valley when it weighs more than a quarter ton. Those are the major plot points behind Knight's Dark Terror, but there's a lot of side quests that catch the party up for leveling or to give them an excursion while they're traveling from point to point. The Island of Lost Dreams is probably the most famous, with the party having a limited time to save some Kalari elves from madness on an island where the local fey creatures have gone mysteriously hostile. These side quests are primarily at the start of the adventure before the breakneck speed kicks in. You can use or ignore them as you see fit, but they are relatively well put together. Now, you want a copy, but you're going to have to look to see what's the best way to get it. First, you've got the original module, which can be pricey. This is one of the most expensive modules that wasn't recalled or limited edition. Incomplete copies in terrible condition go for hundreds of dollars. Not to brag, but my copy is neither incomplete nor terrible. Okay, I'm bragging. You're going to have a doozy of a time finding a copy with the die-cut counters or the complete map. There's a lot of POD copies on Amazon and eBay right now for about $25, but you're going to need to piece the map together for the siege. There's a PDF available for $5, but the physical aspects of this module are its selling points, especially for new players. If you want to play the module, grab a POD and head to your friendly local game store for several dozen goblins and a lot of terrain packs. That's Knight's Dark Terror. It stands at the top for a reason. It's well written, has lots of action, and keeps the party engaged from start to finish. It's a blast to play and run. Getting it is the problem.
And welcome back to Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch. Today we are discussing King's Harvest Module B11 from 1989. This one was created by Carl Sargent, who is better known for his Greyhawk modules, including I Use the Evil, City of Skulls, but his masterpiece is considered The Night Below, the Underdark box set. King's Festival is a bit of a misleading title because there's actually very little about the festival that involved in the module. This is a straight-up dungeon crawl, and it is very much an introductory module, and it is actually one of the best introductory modules because it's not just introductory for the players, but this is to help a first-time dungeon master get through it. There's a large section at the beginning explaining to the dungeon master, don't panic if things go sideways. That's the point of the game. A lot of modules that are supposed to introduce players to the game don't really do a lot for the dungeon master, unfortunately, a lot of the times. So it will go easy on the players, but if it's a first-time dungeon master, they might be overwhelmed with what they're experiencing and not like the game because the players are just running roughshod and they don't know how to handle it. This module has an entire chapter devoted just to explaining to the dungeon master, if the players go off the rails, this is how you get the story moving again. And on several occasions, it will give you multiple options for the different encounters in case the players want to try one tactic over another. And having read a lot of introductory modules, I can say that quite a few of them just throw the dungeon master into the deep end and say sink or swim, but make sure the players have fun. This one kind of holds the DM's hand as it takes him through the module. So not only do they know what's happening, they also understand why it's happening, and they can adjust on the fly if the players get creative. Because let's admit it, as much as we love Keep on the Borderlands with all of its caves of chaos and all the monsters within and all the things you can do with the keep, a dungeon master looking at that map for the very first time and reading through all of the different monsters is going to get overloaded. The intro of the module and the start of the adventure is pretty simple. You ride into town, you're going to get ready for the King Hala Festival, which is an ancient king of Traladara. You have a good time, you settle down, you go to sleep, you wake up in the middle of the night with people screaming because the orcs have attacked and kidnapped a priest. And guess who they asked to go and rescue him? From then on out, it's a straightforward dungeon crawl, facing just lots and lots of orcs with some other monsters thrown in for variety. Some of the stuff you're going to have to fudge because the odds of it happening according to how the script's supposed to work out is pretty low, just because, for example, there's a kobold that if it gets hit once, it will surrender. The problem is it's a kobold. It's got minimum hit points. If you hit it, it's going to be a bloody smear if you hit it with something larger than a dagger. So give him an extra few hit points so that he's not a bloody smear and he can properly surrender. The orcs are numerous, but they're not overwhelming. If they're played correctly, the players are going to have to play very smart because they will investigate loud noises, they will go on patrol, they will investigate why certain ones are missing. But they're also backstabbing brutes, so you can play that off of each other if you can figure out how to get them to attack each other by mistake or on purpose, because some of them have higher aspirations, and for example, one lieutenant won't go help another lieutenant because he thinks he can take out the party after the first one dies and then take over the first one's place. Because of the number of orcs, the game can be a little bit overwhelming for small parties, so there's a lot of NPCs that will be sent along with it to balance out the module, though it is recommended that you play with at least 6 players for this one. Another part that the Dungeon Master might have to fudge is there's a secret door that you have to find it because it's mandatory to the plot. The game can't continue unless you find it, so either fudge the roll if nobody can find it by having an NPC find it, or just make sure that one of the players is an elf or a dwarf. So you hack your way through the caverns. There's really not much in the way other than orcs for this part of the adventure. There's a bugbear and there's a kobold, like I mentioned previously. They've got some trained attack animals, but nothing too overpowering. With a little bit of luck and a lot of bit of strategy, you can make it through this one almost unscathed. So you go through the module, you kill all the orcs. There's no prisoners aside from the guy that you were sent to get in the first place, so you don't have to worry about that. And then the module has a built-in breakpoint because the cleric apparently has been roughed up and he wants to go back immediately, though he does tell you that there's even more evil at the next level, but you're not ready for it, so please go back and get him healed up and get patched up and get ready for the next one. It's the module's subtle way of saying go back, rest, rearm, and get ready because the next part of the dungeon is going to be a little tougher. So you take the cleric back to the town, you get hailed as the big heroes, at least for the first part. They let you stay at the inn for free, they feed you, they heal you. You gotta buy your own weapons and armor. I was amused that when they talked about you can now buy weapons and armor, they put armor in italics, like that's a new special thing for the party. Then again, if you get started in Dungeons & Dragons around 3rd edition or later, you have no idea what banded mail is, so looking at that beautiful masterpiece of descending bands along your waist can look just absolutely magical. So now you have refreshed all your spells, you've healed all your wounds, you've replaced anything that you've expended like arrows or bolts or sling stones, and now you head back. And this time you don't know what you're facing, so the party has no advanced knowledge of what to prepare for. All they know is they're looking for the great evil and they have to stop it, but they don't know what the great evil is. Now, as soon as they get there, it's going to be obvious that the great evil has something to do with undead, because you're going to be facing zombies and skeletons and such, and some ghouls. That's pretty tough. So make sure you bring an elf. And again, it's a kill 'em all. There's no good guys to rescue down here. You're just fighting lots and lots of various random undead and different monsters. Part 2 of the module is a lot shorter than Part 1, because you don't have to go investigate anything, you just gotta go kill, stab, hack. You find the big bad guy at the end of the module, you stab him a lot, he dies, you take his treasure, and then you're ready for the next module. That's it. It's not a long module, it's got the 2 parts. Now, it's longer than Dimrock Dread, and there's a lot more stuff to do than Dimrock Dread, but that's not the beauty of the module. The beauty of the module is how well it's set up to help new players. If you're a grognard like me, and you've been hacking and slashing through dungeons for decades, this is a pretty simple, basic module. There's nothing special to it. Everything it suggests you do, and all the tips it provides for you is old school for people who have been playing for a while. But if you have never picked up a book before and you don't know what a D8 looks like, this module is a godsend because it explains to you everything that the older players already know. It goes into a little detail in what all of your abilities are for the pre-generated characters that it suggests you take. It even gives you some graph paper so you can draw the dungeon as you come across it. I mean, that's a lost art. Nobody does mapping anymore. You put out tiles so you know exactly where you are and what you're facing at all times. This is an old school module. If you want to have a map of the dungeon, you gotta make it yourself. And that was one of the problems with 4th edition that turned the damn game into a board game. It gives you cheat sheets on weapon damage and Thaco and saving throws, and it explains what they are and how to use them. It gives the players a detailed breakdown of the combat sequence so they won't miss a step and they won't forget when it's their turn, and what they can do on their turn. It's just super useful for players who have never played a game before. It does a superior job of explaining a lot of the more esoteric rules, like why a turn is 10 minutes and why a round is 1 minute. So it helps a lot of the players get ready for a game that looks really intimidating. And let's be honest, for a lot of us who started a long time ago, you have to admit when you picked up that first book, it looked like a word salad. But then the module goes one step further and provides the same courtesy to the Dungeon Master by explaining to them how the monsters would work. And it also does a lot of the math for like the monsters' experience points and gives you encounter by encounter treasure so they can keep track of what the party has received. Even better, it tells the Dungeon Master where the best treasures are, actually where all the treasures are, encounter by encounter, so they can keep track. I know we didn't start keeping track of this apparently in the modules until B11, but why didn't we do it sooner, and why did we stop doing that? That's actually super useful. And to show how beginner-friendly the module is, it even includes a blank character sheet that you can take down and photocopy. Because this is before the internet. This is back when we had to go down to the school library and pay a bunch of dimes to get our characters printed out. The module is also known for its really nice interior art. The outside, obviously, is Caldwell, because he is one of the preeminent D&D artists and one of the most famous, to the point of, I mean, it's Caldwell. They named a module after him. The interior art is Valerie Valasek, and if you play Dragonlance, you will recognize her art immediately, though I think this is the only Dragonlance module she ever did. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one. If you want to get a copy of the module, well, prepare to clench some butt cheeks, because it goes for no less than $70, where I could find it online for an actual copy. Prices over $100 were not uncommon for a copy of this module. If you want to buy a PDF and print it out, go down to DriveThruRPG. It's on sale right now for like $4. So your options are $100 or $4. It's up to you. Converting the module to 5th edition is pretty much simple. You'll have to add in some skill checks here and there and just try to balance the orcs out. Again, the problem with BECMI era modules to 5th edition is 5th edition has less monsters but have a lot more hit points because they want you fighting for a longer time. I guess you've got to hack into those orcs rather than one swing and they're down. So balancing that is always going to be a problem. But remember, it's an entry-level module. It's for players who have never played before, so don't try to overwhelm them. Just work on it to the point where you think the module's fair for a 5th edition party and then throw that at them. So that's King's Festival. It's very obviously an introductory level module. It's not meant to challenge older players, but it is meant to not scare younger players, which is something that the game really needed, because at that point in the late 80s, the game had a reputation for just being pointlessly complex. And welcome back to Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch. Today we are talking about the 1989 module B12, Queen's Harvest, where this one actually features an actual queen, unlike the previous one, King's Festival, because that was just a festival to celebrate a king. This one does actually have a physical queen, even if she is self-appointed. This was the very last module ever released for the basic set. It is a pretty pricey one. I'll spoil the price ahead of time so you can go right to DriveThruRPG and get it there instead, because the cheapest I ever found this for was about $90 on Amazon. On eBay they want anywhere between $100 to $200, and I cannot find it cheaper. From what I could tell, it was a limited print run, and it is the very last, so it's really hard to find. But unlike the other two mega expensive modules, Red Arrow, Black Shield, and Night Star Terror, this one's just a module. It doesn't have anything extra. It's just 32 pages. It doesn't have any chits. It doesn't have an extra map. It's just a regular module. The module says it's introductory on the cover, but don't let that fool you. This is a thinking person's module. Yes, it is for low-level characters, but it also is for characters who can actually follow instructions, because if they go into the second part of the module and just start cleaving, you will get overwhelmed and killed, so you have to follow the instructions and do a hit-and-run series of attacks to get the monsters out of their castle so you can winnow them down or sneak inside. This module, like the previous one, was written by Carl Sargent, who got to put his teeth into this one with just a tremendous amount of bad guys. It's effectively a two-part module, because the first part of the module and the second part of the module have little to do with each other as far as playstyle and theme. And the module does have a bit of a plot twist at the very, very beginning. Literally, it's on the front page. You start off with the old cliche, here's a note, come to me, I've got a mission for you, and then you get there and the guy that wrote you the note is dead, and you've been commissioned by his son instead to go track down his father's stuff and get it for him. That starts the adventure, which is basically go into the dungeon of this wizard, kill all the guardians he's got, get his magic sword, get this fancy tiara, and return it to the sun, and get paid. The catch is this module was obviously meant to be played after B11 or some other low-level module, because the third part of the module you do have to be at least level 3 to get started, because it is pretty tough and pretty deadly if you're not prepared. If you're not going to run King's Festival, I recommend one of the earlier ones like Rahasia or Palace of the Silver Princess. Actually, I recommend that one for reasons that I'll make clear in a bit. Just finish a module before this one that gets you to at least second level, preferably about halfway through second level before you start this one, or else you're going to have to squeeze another adventure between the first half of this and the second half of this to make it so that you can actually survive the second half. The first half of the module, like I said, it's a straight up dungeon crawl. You got some traps, you got lots of monsters, you have a lot of Mystara specific monsters, like Imagine's in there, which is a magical man with stretchy arms. You've got some wood golems. You've got the new monsters, the phase stingers, which they stole straight out of Phantasm and did not even attempt to disguise it. Though the phase stingers are nowhere near as bad as the spiky balls from Phantasm, so at least give thanks for that. So you go into the dungeon, you clean it out, you get the magic sword, you get the tiara, you return it to him. You have to fight just generic monsters you'd expect at first level. You do run across a couple of thieves that are down there doing thieving abilities, and they have their own unique names and personalities. But like I said, if you want to tie this with a previous module, run Palace of the Silver Princess, so that way you can have Candela and Duchess show up again. That way you can tie the two into the campaign. Or run this, run into Candela and Duchess, then run Palace of the Silver Princess, so you run into them again. Then you go on to the second part of the module. I've always liked reoccurring NPCs. It gives the campaign some semblance of normality because you're going to meet these people over and over again, especially when they're competitors for you but not rivals. So like you'll meet these two in several adventures because they're also looting the dungeon, and sometimes you can work together and sometimes you will compete. And running into two separate pairs of female thieves who are using their looks to get their way to the party, as well as try to steal as much as they can and get out before the party notices them. That's too much of a coincidence not to make them the same people. And all the Duchess and Candela pictures I used were from the upcoming book, Art of the Genre. They were done by a friend of mine named Dominici Nazzetti. They're really proud of their stuff. It's good work, so go over and support them on their page. It's going to be under the folio section of supplements. So you kill the bad guys, you get the treasure, you return, you get paid, you get XP, and then hopefully you're going to be about third level when you start the next one. Because the boss fight for the first dungeon is actually a pretty nasty party-on-party fight where you run across some evil bad guys also searching for the treasures, and you are going to have a knockdown drag-out. Unless, of course, your wizard casts Sleep, which will get rid of automatically just about everyone in their party except for the elf. So if you're the DM, make sure that you throw a small swarm of nasties that can be easily stopped with a sleep spell beforehand, so the fight's at least fair and entertaining. So the bad guys have some information on them that says they were sent by the self-appointed queen, Ilyana Penhaligon, who is creating a small army to go invade the surrounding countryside and carve herself out her own kingdom, thus getting her bounty, which gives you the module's name. Bear in mind, she's not actual royalty, she's just some glorified warlord looking to carve out her own little kingdom. So you get dispatched to there to take her out, and then you discover she's got a castle with about 100 little mercenary hirelings. So that's when it gets complicated. The NPCs will tell you you need to hit and run and lure them out into ambushes, and then you can sneak in. And this is where the party needs to listen, because if they go in through those front doors, they're going to get swarmed. And that's not going to end well, so don't do that. You're going to have to be creative. You're going to have to be sneaky. This is going to take days upon days of game time to play. You're going to have to do hit and runs. You're going to have to set up ambushes. You might want to hire some hirelings so that you can kind of even the numbers out until you get their numbers down low enough that you can actually sneak in. Or if you can lure them all out, sneak in when they're all gone. Once you're inside, it's pretty much straight up dungeon crawl, only you're going to have to be avoiding the passing guards or at least hiding bodies. They're all humanoids for the most part, so you can't just take some out and put on their uniforms and walk around without anybody noticing. The module is written well enough that each of the four factions of the humanoids, you've got goblins, you've got orcs, you've got gnolls, you've got hobgoblins, and they all have something wrong with them, except for the hobgoblins. The hobgoblins are actually pretty loyal, but the rest of them you can spook or you can trick into fighting each other. So there's ways to get around the sheer numbers built into the module already. So if you can avoid all the mooks and skip straight to most of the bosses, you can take down the castle. And of course, when you take down the boss, no one has any loyalty to her, so everybody else flees and leaves when you show up with the person who signs their paycheck, even though you're badly outnumbered. So you have to play the second half really smart. You have to follow instructions or else you're going to get the entire party killed. It's kind of puzzle heavy in its own way because you have to figure out how to get around each of the four different types of humanoids, and only the hobgoblins you'll really have to hack your way through. The module says it's introductory, but it lacks the large amount of player and DM aids that King's Festival has. So if you have both of them, grab the aids from Festival and bring it over and cheat and use it on the bounty, so it makes it a little bit easier to play. The module assumes that you have taken everything King's Festival has taught you to heart, so it doesn't repeat anything. You're going to have to figure out a lot of this on your own. So there's no charts telling you, like example, order of turn for the initiative round, and the Dungeon Master doesn't have all those nifty charts explaining where all the monsters are, where all the treasures are, and how much experience everything's worth. Which I think that only ever appeared in King's Festival, but I wish it would have become a thing for all future modules, because that's just super useful. So the module is a grind, but only in the most traditional sense, in that you've got to keep the number of the bad guys down, and by doing that you're going to have to harass them and take them out when you can isolate them. You have to take advantage of the rule don't split the party by making the bad guys split the party into groups that you can take down. And that is tricky for characters that are about second level. This is another one that would have done very well with the rules cyclopedia for the skill checks, because you're going to need a lot of strategy and tactics and basic know-how on how to get these guys to do what you want so you can isolate. Now, the big bad never leaves the castle, so eventually you're going to have to go in and take her out, and you're exploring a castle, and there's a lot of bad guys, and you have to learn to stay away from the barracks or the guard rooms, because there's a lot of them in there, unless you've managed to thin out their ranks. And these are intelligent bad guys, so if you start taking them out, they go on full alert and start expecting to be attacked. So you're going to have to be sneaky and play smarter. They do hype up that the main bad guy is insane and has always been insane, but for a twist, if you want to, she's got this really powerful magic sword. Make it intelligent and having it control her, so if you can get the sword away from her, then you've got a villain that no longer is evil. Just saying, if you want to torture basic level characters, give them a morality check on the fact that if you get the sword away from the person, she's no longer evil and she's no longer your enemy, and maybe you can redeem her. On the other hand, you can just stab her in the gut until she dies, in which case you've managed to take her out of the adventure and you get the same reward anyways, but then you might have a cursed magical sword that tries to take over when you pick it up. Just saying, sometimes you can add a little bit to the module to make it a lot better. The module does do a good job on giving you a twist on some old cliched story types, like the wizard that needs your help, or the go into the dungeon to take out the bad guy. In this case, the wizard's dead. He's been dead for a while. It's his son that needs help because he needs to reclaim his father's inheritance, which wasn't actually stolen, it was just really well guarded. Then you get told to go to the evil bad guy's lair and take her out so that ends the menace. The only problem is she is extremely well guarded, and you're going to have to figure out a way to get her unguarded so you can actually get to her. This isn't something you run into most basic level modules. The initial cause for the opening half of the dungeon crawl is a bit petty, because he's literally wanting this tiara to go woo somebody. It's not to save the world or help him, make the world a better place. The guy's just trying to get some bling so he can get some. He doesn't explain this, because if he did, the male characters would probably understand, because everybody knows that if you're going to start with some serious wooage, you're going to need to show some goods. Personality is only going to get you so far. Eventually you're going to have to show some financial responsibility and preferably some disposable income. In fact, the sword that you've got to go get is only there so he can look sharp with it, because it's a really nice looking sword. And you get to use it for as long as you're down in the dungeon. But one of the twists is you only got 48 hours, because this guy's got a date and he's got to get ready. So you have got to get that tiara and sword so he can go look his sharpest. If you want to do a side adventure, you can play like wingman for him for the date while he's trying to impress her. That would actually be kind of fun. The module by itself is actually pretty long. It's 32 pages, which for a basic level module, especially without all of the character aids that King's Festival have, that's a lot of pages. It can be a bit dry compared to the other modules, because there's nothing really special about the first half of the module except for the fact that you've got 2 days to get this done, so you can't really rest. The second half requires you to play extremely smart by ducking in and out until you can actually get to where you need to be. The module's got a lot of room for tweaking, and I highly recommend it, because it's kind of a bare bones module as far as it's written. If they made friends with the 2 thieves from the start, have them available to help them infiltrate the dungeon. Use the money you made from the first part to hire mercenaries to help you even the odds, or at least set up more ambushes. You have to be real careful with the second part, because you are outnumbered 20 to 1. It can get really frustrating if things don't go well. If things go badly, this can turn into a TPK real quick. Converting this to 5th edition isn't much of a problem. Again, most of it's scaling. You're going to have to come up with rule stats for the various monsters that are new. There's a lot of monsters from the Rule Cyclopedia that never made it to 5th edition, so you're going to have to make those up out of whole cloth. And then you're going to have to balance the modules because of the sheer number of monsters in the second part. And that's going to be the tough one, because where monsters were usually one-hit kills in Rule Cyclopedia or BECMI, in 5th edition, they have low armor classes because you don't get many bonuses to hit. So to make up for the fact that it's easier to hit the monsters, they have a ton more hit points, which makes for a lot less fun combat. Where you stab a hobgoblin in the Rule Cyclopedia era and he goes down, but you have 2 more hobgoblins. In 5th edition, you got to stab a hobgoblin 3 times before it goes down. You're facing a lot less hobgoblins, but they take forever to kill. But that's pretty much every monster in 5th edition. They made up for the lower armor class by just making them so much difficult to kill that it turns a lot of combat into slogs. If you want to try to get as close as possible, cut the number of hit points down for the monsters. I think a hobgoblin is like 22. Cut it down to 10, at least for the mooks, so that way you can cleave through the stuff that you don't really want to spend a lot of time on, and then you can just rebalance it that way. If you want to buy the module, get it straight from DriveThruRPG, then drive down to your local printer and have it printed out, because it's $4 PDF and it's $100, and that price point is just ludicrous. So as soon as they put it back on print on demand, that's when I'll get my copy. So that'll wrap up Queen's Bounty. Nice module, has some unique takes on stuff, just needs a little bit more fleshing out. Next week, I'm going to go into the Rule Cyclopedia. It's not entirely about Mystara. It does cover the known world, does cover a lot of the countries in passing, but it is one of the best rule sets they ever put out for Dungeons & Dragons. I'd put their rules for mass combat, or their rules for domain management, or weapon mastery up against anything any other edition has ever had. Do not call it basic. Thus ends Queen's Bounty. So until next week, I think I'm going slightly mad.